Tonight, we're going to explore how ancient humans kept food fresh in a world without refrigerators, freezers, plastic wrap, vacuum sealers, or that mysterious drawer in your modern fridge where vegetables quietly reconsider their life choices. You stand near the edge of a small settlement as evening settles over the land. The air smells of wood smoke, damp earth, crushed herbs, and grain dust. Somewhere nearby, a pot bubbles slowly over a fire. A dog circles hopefully around a pile of baskets. Someone carries fish away from the river, while another person checks a clay jar whose contents must last far longer than tonight. For ancient people, keeping food fresh is not a hobby, a culinary trend, or an excuse to buy decorative jars. It is survival. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where in the world you're listening from and what your local time is. It is always strangely comforting to imagine all those distant rooms growing quiet at once. Now, dim the lights and allow the modern kitchen to disappear. The electric hum of the refrigerator fades. The glow of its little interior lamp vanishes. You are left instead with firelight, baskets, pottery, smoke, salt if you're lucky, and generations of careful observation. Food begins changing from the moment it is harvested, caught, milked, or killed. Ancient people do not understand bacteria in the modern scientific sense. No one peers through a microscope and announces that microorganisms are causing trouble. Yet people are excellent observers, especially when a mistake can mean hunger. You quickly learn that fresh meat left in warm air does not remain pleasant for long. Fish behaves even worse. Milk changes rapidly. Fruit softens, ferments, or grows mold. Damp grain becomes musty. Insects find stored food with astonishing efficiency, apparently having invented pantry raids thousands of years before humans invented cupboards. So you begin to notice patterns. Food lasts longer in cool places. Dry food usually keeps better than wet food. Smoke changes meat. Salt changes fish. Grain survives when protected from rain and pests. Some foods become sour yet remain edible. Certain containers work better than others. None of these observations arrives as a single brilliant discovery. Preservation develops slowly, across many communities, landscapes, and generations. A family living beside a cold northern coast faces different problems from farmers beside the Nile. Desert communities can use intense dryness. Forest communities have abundant fuel for smoke. Mountain peoples can exploit cold air, shaded caves, and winter snow. Your preservation method depends partly on what nature gives you. Imagine that you are part of a hunting group many thousands of years ago. A successful hunt brings an immediate problem disguised as good fortune. There is suddenly more meat than everyone can eat. The obvious solution is to invite more relatives, which ancient families probably do with the same mixture of generosity and mild regret, familiar at large gatherings today. But eventually, there is still food remaining. Leaving it exposed means losing it to insects, scavengers, heat, and decay. Eating everything immediately is impossible. Moving with all of it is difficult. You need another strategy. This pressure encourages experimentation. Pieces of meat placed near warmth lose moisture. Thin strips dry faster than thick chunks. Food exposed to moving air behaves differently from food trapped in damp surroundings. Meat near a smoky fire develops a different surface and lasts longer under certain conditions. You do not need to know chemistry to notice results. Over generations, successful habits become traditions. Parents teach children which foods can be stored. Elders know which seasons are safest for preparing certain provisions. Hunters learn how thinly to slice meat. Farmers learn when grain is dry enough for storage. Potters shape containers suited to particular foods. Records from later ancient civilizations confirm that food storage becomes a carefully organized part of household and state life. Written accounts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, China, and other regions describe grain stores, rations, preserved fish, dried fruits, oils, wine, and other foods meant to survive beyond the day they are produced. But the basic human challenge is far older than writing. You can feel it in the rhythm of the year. Spring may bring tender plants, young animals, and fresh milk. Summer offers fruit, fish, and growing crops. Autumn can produce abundance, especially after harvest. Winter may offer very little. The difficult question is simple. How do you carry autumn into winter? That question shapes preservation. Picture baskets of grain arriving after harvest. You run the kernels between your fingers. They are hard, dry, and surprisingly durable when properly handled. Grain becomes one of humanity's most valuable stored foods, partly because it naturally contains relatively little moisture once dried. But even grain is not safe. Moisture encourages spoilage. Rodents chew through containers. Beetles and other pests can infest stores. A poorly designed storage pit can turn months of labor into a damp, unpleasant mass. So people experiment with raised platforms, sealed jars, storage pits, woven baskets, clay-lined spaces, and dedicated granaries. A council decree from some later societies proves just how seriously communities take food reserves. Authorities regulate grain distribution, storage, and emergency supplies because a failed harvest is not merely a household inconvenience. It can threaten an entire town. You begin to understand that preservation is not simply about food. It is about power. A household with reliable stores has security. A ruler controlling granaries has influence. An army with portable provisions can travel farther. A city with reserves can survive shortages longer. Preserved food quietly supports trade, migration, warfare, exploration, religious festivals, and daily domestic life. Even something as humble as a dried handful of grain can help shape history. And then there are containers. For a moment, your attention settles on a clay jar cooling in the shade. Its surface feels slightly rough beneath your fingers. Pottery changes food storage dramatically, because it gives people sturdy vessels that can protect dry goods and liquids. Depending on the culture and purpose, jars may hold grain, oil, fermented drinks, dried fruit, seeds, or preserved sauces. Some are sealed with lids, clay, cloth, resin, wax, or other materials. The seal matters because air, moisture, insects, and animals are constant enemies. Oddly enough, ancient storage sometimes creates accidental time capsules. Archaeologists have discovered containers with traces of food still clinging inside, allowing researchers to identify oils, grains, fermented drinks, dairy products, and plant residues long after the people who prepared them disappeared. A forgotten smear inside a pot can become evidence thousands of years later. You can almost sympathize with the ancient cook who failed to wash the dishes properly. Their laziness becomes archaeology's good fortune. Preservation also influences taste. At first, you might imagine that preserved food is simply inferior food kept from going bad. But preservation creates flavors people come to enjoy. Drying concentrates sweetness in fruit. Smoking adds deep aromas. Fermentation produces sourness, complexity, and sometimes alcohol. Salt transforms texture. Stored cheeses develop personalities strong enough to announce themselves from across a room. People begin preserving food not only because they must, but because they like what preservation creates. This creates an interesting problem for historians. Historians still argue whether some early preservation techniques began primarily as deliberate attempts to extend shelf life, or whether certain methods emerge partly through accidental transformations that people later recognize as useful. Fermentation is a perfect example. A vessel of grain, fruit, or milk changes naturally under the right conditions. Someone tastes the result. If the experience is pleasant rather than disastrous, the process may be repeated. Human civilization contains many moments that can be summarized as, well, that smells unusual. Let's try it. Fortunately, enough of those experiments work. You also notice that preservation knowledge is local. There is no universal ancient cookbook circulating between continents. Instead, methods develop around climate and available resources. Hot, dry regions favour sun-drying. Coastal communities often preserve fish. Pastoral societies must find ways to handle milk. Agricultural settlements develop techniques for grain. People living in colder climates can use seasonal freezing or naturally chilled spaces. The environment becomes part of the kitchen. Sunlight is equipment. Wind is equipment. Cold earth is equipment. Smoke is equipment. A cave may function like a cool pantry. A roof beam may become a drying rack. A ceramic jar can become a tiny controlled environment. You do not see ancient people helplessly waiting for food to spoil. You see practical intelligence at work. This intelligence often comes through repetition rather than formal theory. You learn because someone shows you. Touch this grain. It is still damp. Smell this fish. It needs more drying. Keep that jar away from direct heat. Do not let rain reach these baskets. Hang the meat higher. Use the cooler corner. Check the lid. Knowledge travels through hands, habits, stories, and routine. Much of the expertise may never be written down. That is important because history often preserves the voices of rulers, priests, merchants, and officials more clearly than those of ordinary cooks and food workers. Yet countless unnamed people develop and maintain preservation practices every day. You can picture them working quietly. Someone turns strips of meat so both sides dry. Someone sorts damaged grain from healthy kernels. Someone moves jars into shade. Someone checks a storage pit after heavy rain. Someone teaches a child how food should smell when it is safe. These are modest actions, but together they create resilience. A curious footnote appears in the way ancient people sometimes treat food and medicine as overlapping categories. Dried herbs, honey, vinegar, fermented drinks, oils, and salted foods may serve culinary ritual or medicinal purposes depending on place and period. The pantry can resemble a medicine chest. The medicine chest can resemble dinner, and naturally humans also bring belief into preservation. Certain preparation days may carry religious meaning. Offerings can include stored foods. Some communities connect harvest protection with gods, spirits, ancestors, or ritual purity. When a year's survival depends on grain staying dry, asking supernatural forces for assistance probably feels entirely reasonable. You stand now beside a family's stored provisions as night settles fully. There are no glowing temperature displays, no expiration labels, no plastic containers with suspiciously complicated lids. Instead, you rely on sight, scent, touch, memory, and experience. You know that abundance is temporary. The harvest will end, the fish run will pass, fruit will disappear from the trees, cold weather may come, travellers may arrive, animals may fail, rain may not fall when expected. So preservation turns time itself into something you can manage. Fresh food belongs to the moment. Preserved food belongs to the future. That difference changes human life. It allows people to remain in one place longer. It supports larger settlements. It provides reserves for difficult seasons. It makes journeys more practical. It creates goods worth trading. Most of all, it reduces the terrifying gap between having plenty today and having nothing tomorrow. You can hear the settlement becoming quieter now. A wooden lid settles onto a jar. Sandals scrape softly against packed earth. Somewhere, grain rustles into a basket. A final cooking fire sends a thin scent of smoke through the evening air. Nothing here looks like a refrigerator. Yet everywhere you look, people are already solving the same problem your refrigerator solves today. They are slowing change. They are buying time. And in the ancient world, A little extra time can mean everything. Morning heat gathers over an open patch of ground, and you watch strips of food laid carefully where sunlight and moving air can reach them. The scene looks almost too simple to count as technology. No gears turn, no furnace roars, no complicated tool waits nearby. There is only sun, wind, patience, and the quiet understanding that water hidden inside food is one of the great accomplices of decay. You pick up a thin strip of meat and feel its surface tightening beneath your fingers. It is still flexible, still heavy with moisture, but already changing. Nearby, sliced fruit rests on woven mats. Fish hang from wooden frames. Bundles of herbs sway gently from roof beams. Grain spreads across a hard surface where it can dry after harvest. Drying is among humanity's oldest preservation methods because nature performs most of the work. Heat encourages moisture to leave food. Air carries that moisture away. When enough water disappears, many organisms responsible for spoilage struggle to grow. Ancient people do not describe this using terms like water activity or microbial metabolism, but they recognize the pattern with impressive accuracy. Wet food spoils quickly. Dry food often waits. That difference becomes enormously useful. You can imagine the first lessons arriving almost accidentally. Meat left in a warm, breezy place becomes leathery rather than rotten. Fruit forgotten on a branch shrivels, yet remains sweet. Seeds dry naturally in their husks. Fish exposed to coastal wind lose moisture. Observation turns accident into method. Soon, people are not merely noticing dried food, they are making it deliberately. The shape of the food matters. A large chunk dries slowly because moisture trapped inside must travel farther to escape. A thin strip dries faster. So knives, stone blades, and careful cutting become part of preservation. You watch someone slice meat into narrow pieces, each one roughly similar in thickness. This is not decorative cooking. Uneven strips create uneven results. A thick section may stay damp in the center, while a thinner edge becomes hard. The work demands attention. Food is turned, surfaces are checked, pieces are moved when shadows change. Clouds become relevant. Rain becomes deeply irritating. A sudden shower can ruin hours of drying. And ancient households do not have weather apps offering cheerful little thunderstorm icons. They have the horizon, the smell of the air, the behavior of birds, and whatever local wisdom experience provides. In arid landscapes, conditions can be remarkably favorable. Strong sunlight, low humidity, and dry winds help remove moisture quickly. In wetter regions, people must work harder, using shelters, elevated racks, hearth warmth, or seasonal periods of reliable weather. Geography shapes technique. You stand beside a rack made from branches. Fish are arranged so that air can pass around them, rather than leaving them piled together. The principle is simple, but important. Crowding traps moisture. Spacing encourages drying. Someone has learned this. Perhaps through countless failures no historian records. That is one of the quiet realities of ancient food history. Every successful tradition probably stands on top of mistakes. Too thick, too damp, too shaded, too close to the ground, too late in the season, too many flies. Human knowledge grows from corrections. Records confirm that dried fish, dried fruits, grains, and dried meat become important foods in many ancient societies. Their value is easy to understand. Once lighter and more stable, food becomes easier to store and transport. A basket of fresh grapes is heavy with water. A basket of raisins is not. A fresh fish is difficult company on a long journey. A properly dried fish is considerably less demanding. This matters for travellers, shepherds, merchants, soldiers, sailors, and anyone moving away from a reliable food supply. Drying does something else as well. It concentrates flavour. You bite into a dried piece of fruit and notice the sweetness seems stronger. That is because much of the water is gone while the sugars remain. The fruit shrinks, but its taste becomes more intense. Dates, figs, grapes, apricots, and other fruits lend themselves beautifully to this treatment in regions where climate permits. The drying ground becomes almost like a seasonal workshop. Fruit is sorted, damaged pieces are removed, good pieces are spread in sunlight, insects are chased away, dust must be managed. Children may help with turning or carrying trays, although one suspects some children are more enthusiastic about sampling than labour. The scent is pleasant. Warm fruit mixed with dry grass and heated earth. Grain receives its own careful treatment. After harvesting, cereal crops often need further drying before storage. Damp grain can heat, mould, or spoil, so you see people spreading kernels where sun and air can reach them. They rake through the grain. They turn it. They test it between their fingers. Experience tells them when it is ready. In some places, grain is dried on prepared floors. Elsewhere, baskets, mats, or raised surfaces help keep it away from damp soil. A small change in moisture can decide whether food survives for months. This makes weather part of a household strategy. Too much rain near harvest creates anxiety. Dry conditions can be a blessing for preservation, even when they create difficulties elsewhere. No one gets a perfect climate. Nature always seems to charge a fee. Fish drying produces its own distinctive world. You approach a coastal settlement where the air is sharp with salt, seaweed, and drying catch. Fish hang in rows, their bodies stiffening as wind moves between them. Cold coastal air can sometimes help, especially where temperatures remain low enough to slow spoilage while drying occurs. The method works particularly well with small fish or with larger fish that have been opened, split or cut into thinner portions. Preparing the fish correctly matters because the interior must lose moisture too. You hear knives scraping against wooden boards. Gulls complain from a safe distance. Someone waves them away with the practiced annoyance of a person who has done this every morning for years. Animals are always interested in preservation projects. Dogs, birds, rodents, and insects apparently consider themselves unpaid quality inspectors, so drying racks are often raised above the ground. Height improves airflow and provides some protection from scavengers. Nets, coverings, smoke from nearby fires, or constant supervision can help discourage insects, although none of these methods is perfect. Oddly enough, flies can become one of the biggest practical enemies of meat and fish drying. If insects lay eggs on food, the result is obviously undesirable. Communities develop habits for choosing windy locations, covering food with breathable materials, or timing drying for seasons when insect activity is lower. A breezy hill may therefore be more valuable than a warmer but still location. Air movement matters almost as much as heat. You feel that difference immediately. Stand in stagnant heat, and everything seems heavy. Stand in dry wind, and moisture disappears from skin, cloth, soil, and food. Ancient people learned to use that invisible movement. Some communities combine solar warmth with gentle heat from household fires. Food may be hung high in a structure where warm air rises. This can accelerate drying without turning the process into full cooking. The distinction is subtle. Too much heat cooks the surface rapidly while leaving moisture trapped inside. Too little heat lets spoilage begin before drying succeeds. The best result comes from balance. You find yourself admiring the skill involved because modern instructions make food preservation sound wonderfully precise. Set a temperature. Wait a certain number of hours. Check a digital display. Ancient preservation depends on judgment, touch, smell, colour, flexibility, weight, weather, the sound a grain makes when bitten, the way a strip bends, the texture beneath the thumb. Knowledge lives in the senses. A curious footnote appears in some traditional drying practices where food is deliberately placed on rocks, rooftops, or even specially prepared plaster surfaces warmed by the sun. These surfaces collect heat during the day, and release it slowly, extending the drying effect beyond the strongest sunlight. A rooftop can become part architecture, part food processor. Ancient ingenuity is often like this. A useful place performs several jobs. A courtyard is for work, conversation, animals, craft, cooking, and drying food. A roof provides shelter and also catches sun. A woven mat serves as a bed one day, and a drying surface another. Nothing needs a single purpose. You watch herbs being gathered and tied into bundles. Their preservation has a slightly different goal. Leaves contain aromatic oils that people value for cooking, fragrance, ritual, and medicine. Drying allows those herbs to remain useful beyond their fresh season. The bundles hang in shade rather than harsh sunlight when too much heat might damage delicate aroma. That small distinction shows how refined preservation knowledge becomes. Not every food should be dried in exactly the same way. Some benefit from direct sun, some prefer shade, some need slicing, some are left whole, some are dried quickly, others slowly. Scholars bicker over how early deliberate drying can be confidently distinguished from naturally desiccated food in archaeological evidence. A shriveled plant remain or dried fragment can survive for thousands of years, but proving that a human intentionally preserved it is much harder. This is one of archaeology's recurring frustrations. The object survives. The intention does not. You can discover ancient seeds, dried tissues, pits, fibres, and food residues, but the thoughts of the person handling them are gone. Were they preparing food for winter, for travel, for trade, for ritual, for tomorrow's meal? Sometimes the evidence gives only hints, yet drying leaves strong clues, because it appears again and again across environments where extended storage is useful. The logic is almost universal. Take away water, reduce weight, slow decay, extend usefulness. Simple does not mean unsophisticated. In fact, simplicity may be the reason drying becomes so enduring. You need no special ingredient, no rare mineral, no expensive container, no centralized workshop. If the climate cooperates, almost any household can attempt it. That makes drying especially powerful for ordinary people. You can picture a family preparing food near the end of a productive season. The work is repetitive, but not unpleasant. Slice, arrange, turn, check, carry inside if rain threatens. Bring it out again when the sky clears. The rhythm becomes part of daily life. Children learn by watching. Adults judge by experience. Older people know the tricks no one bothers writing down. A grandmother may know exactly how a piece of fruit should feel when ready, and her explanation might simply be, "Not yet." Ancient technical manuals would be considerably shorter if all expertise were recorded that way. The transformation becomes visible over hours and days. A glossy slice turns darker, a plump grape wrinkles, a fish stiffens, a leafy herb becomes fragile between your fingers. Food loses softness but gains time. That trade becomes the heart of drying. Freshness, in the ancient world, does not always mean keeping food exactly as it was. Sometimes preservation means accepting transformation. The grape becomes a raisin, the plum becomes a prune. The meat becomes firm and concentrated, the herb becomes brittle and fragrant. You preserve food by allowing it to become something new. That idea feels almost philosophical in the quiet afternoon heat. Nothing stays unchanged. The cleverness lies in guiding the change. As sunlight begins to weaken, the drying racks cast long shadows over the ground. Someone gathers pieces that have reached the right texture. Others remain outside a little longer. You hear cloth rustling over a basket. Dry stems crack beneath a sandal. Warm fruit gives off a faint sweetness. Your fingers touch a strip that has lost most of its moisture and become surprisingly light. There is satisfaction in that lightness. Less water means less burden. Less burden means easier travel, More time means greater security. Sun and wind have done what no machine is needed to accomplish. They have turned a brief harvest into something that can wait. You stand beside a shallow coastal basin under a hard white sun, and the ground seems almost to glitter. Water has retreated from the edge, leaving pale crystals clinging to the mud. When you touch one to your tongue, the taste is immediate and unmistakable. Salt. Today it sits casually beside pepper on restaurant tables, usually ignored unless someone decides the soup is disappointing. In the ancient world, salt can be precious, practical, difficult to obtain, and absolutely essential to preserving certain foods. Its value begins with a simple problem. Meat and fish contain a great deal of water, and water encourages spoilage. Salt helps draw moisture out of food, while also making conditions less friendly to many organisms that cause decay. Ancient people do not describe this in chemical language. They simply learn that properly salted food lasts longer. You watch fish arrive from the shore in baskets. The catch is fresh, silver, and heavy. It cannot remain that way for long, especially beneath a warm sun. So the work begins quickly. Someone cleans the fish. Someone splits larger bodies open. Someone scatters coarse salt across the exposed flesh. Someone presses layers into a container. Salt touches every surface it can reach. The process is physical and repetitive. Crystals scrape against skin. Brine runs between fingers. The smell of sea and fish becomes stronger as the day warms. Preservation is rarely glamorous. It often involves sticky hands and an alarming number of flies. Yet the result can transform a highly perishable catch into food capable of surviving transport and storage. This matters enormously to coastal communities. Fishing can produce abundance suddenly. A good catch may provide far more than a household can eat in a day or two. Without preservation, much of that abundance disappears almost as quickly as it arrives. Salt changes the equation. A large catch becomes a reserve. A reserve becomes a trade good. A trade good can travel inland. Soon, people far from the sea may be eating fish preserved beside a coast they have never seen. The salt itself must come from somewhere. In some regions, people collect it from evaporated seawater. Shallow ponds and pans allow sun and wind to remove water until crystals remain. Elsewhere, salt comes from inland springs, salty lakes, mineral deposits, or mines. The landscape determines the method. You crouch beside a salt pan as workers scrape pale crystals into baskets. The surface crunches softly beneath wooden tools. Heat presses against your shoulders. Every movement feels brighter here because salt reflects the sunlight back toward you. Producing salt can be slow, laborious work. That effort helps explain its importance. A place with dependable salt resources can become economically valuable. Routes develop between salt-producing regions and communities that need the mineral for food, animals, and daily life. Salt is useful enough to justify long journeys. You might imagine merchants leading pack animals across dry roads carrying sacks or blocks that look almost absurdly ordinary. No gold gleams, no gemstone sparkles, just salt, yet everyone needs it. Records confirm that salt becomes a major commodity in numerous ancient economies, and governments sometimes regulate its production, movement, or taxation, because anything widely needed attracts official attention sooner or later. Apparently taxation is one preservation technique civilization never struggled to invent. Salt works especially well when paired with careful preparation. If you simply toss a little salt onto the surface of a thick piece of meat, the interior can remain vulnerable. Preservation requires enough salt, enough time, and sometimes repeated treatment. So you watch a worker rub salt firmly into meat. The crystals disappear into creases. More salt is added. The meat rests. Liquid begins collecting beneath it. This liquid reveals part of what is happening. Salt draws water from the tissue. As moisture leaves, the meat becomes firmer, the texture changes, the flavour intensifies, the food gradually becomes less inviting to many forms of spoilage. Of course, salt does not perform miracles. Food can still become unsafe if preparation is careless, contamination is severe, or conditions are unsuitable. Ancient preservation depends on experience. How much salt, how long, at what temperature, which cut, which season, which container. These questions matter, even if answers are learned through habit rather than written measurements. You move toward a cluster of large jars standing in shade. Inside one. Fish sits beneath salty liquid. This is brine. Instead of covering food with dry crystals alone, people can preserve it in water containing a strong concentration of salt. Brine reaches irregular surfaces easily. Food can be submerged so that salty liquid surrounds it. The method becomes useful for fish, vegetables, olives, and other foods depending on region and period. You hear the faint knock of pottery as a lid is adjusted. The jar smells sharp, marine, and intensely savoury. Nothing about it whispers. It announces itself. Braining transforms texture and flavour while extending usefulness. The principle sounds simple, but maintaining the right strength of brine requires judgment. If the mixture is too weak, preservation may fail. If it is extremely strong, the food may become almost aggressively salty. Ancient cooks must learn a balance that works for both safety and eating. There are clever practical methods. An experienced worker may judge brine by taste. In some traditions, people use floating objects such as eggs or pieces of food to estimate salt concentration, because dense brine changes how things float. The precise methods vary widely, but the underlying idea is wonderfully practical. When measuring equipment does not exist, ordinary objects become instruments. A kitchen becomes a laboratory without anyone calling it one. Salt also combines beautifully with drying. Imagine strips of meat rubbed with salt and then exposed to moving air. The salt helps remove moisture. The dry environment continues the work. Together, the techniques can produce food far more durable than either careless salting or casual drying alone. For travellers, this matters. Salted meat can be compact. Salted fish can be packed. Preserved foods can accompany sailors, merchants, soldiers, and labourers who cannot depend on finding fresh food each day. Portable food changes mobility. A person carrying provisions is less tied to the next harvest field, fishing village, or market stall. This does not mean ancient travellers live comfortably. A bag of salted fish eaten repeatedly for days may test the spirit, but it is better than hunger. You can almost hear someone saying this while chewing with very little enthusiasm. The flavour of preserved food can also become culturally important. Once people grow accustomed to strongly salted foods, those tastes become desirable in their own right. Salt is not merely preventing decay, it is creating cuisine. Fish sauces offer a vivid example. Across several ancient societies, fish and salt are combined and allowed to transform over time into powerful fermented condiments. The details vary enormously from one culture to another. Some versions use whole small fish, others use fish parts. Salt controls the mixture, while enzymes and microorganisms break tissues down. The resulting liquid can be intensely savoury. One scandalous aside is that ancient fish sauce production could be so pungent that workshops were sometimes located away from the most desirable residential areas. You can understand why. Imagine opening a jar of warm fermented fish beside your neighbour's bedroom window. Civil disputes practically right themselves. Yet such sauces become enormously popular. In the Roman world, varieties of fermented fish sauce appear across social levels, from ordinary cooking products to prestigious versions traded over long distances. Containers travel widely. Labels and inscriptions sometimes identify producers, origins, Or qualities. A humble mixture of fish and salt becomes part of an international food economy. The jar in front of you may therefore contain more than dinner. It may contain branding. Ancient people understand marketing rather well. Olives present another preservation challenge. Fresh from the tree, many olives are unpleasantly bitter and require processing before they become enjoyable to eat. Brining is one way of transforming them. Salt water helps create conditions for fermentation, while bitterness gradually decreases. The fruit softens. Flavor changes. Time turns something difficult to eat into a familiar table food. You lift an olive from a jar. Its skin shines in the light. It tastes salty, slightly sour, and far gentler than the raw fruit. Preservation and preparation become almost impossible to separate. The method does not merely keep the olive. It creates the olive as people want to eat it. Vegetables can undergo similar transformations. Depending on region, people place plant foods into salty liquids, sometimes with herbs, spices, vinegar, or other ingredients. Salt helps shape the microbial environment. Beneficial fermentation can develop while many undesirable organisms are discouraged. Again, ancient people may not know why at a microscopic level, but they know what successful food looks, smells, and tastes like. That sensory judgment is crucial. You smell a jar before tasting. You inspect the surface. You notice color. You feel texture. Your body becomes the final testing instrument, which is a slightly unsettling thought when there is no emergency room nearby. Salt is valuable for dairy as well. Cheesemaking often involves salting curds or finished cheeses. Salt influences moisture, flavor, rind development, and storage life. A fresh cheese can be soft and delicate. A salted cheese may become firmer and more durable. Pastoral communities benefit greatly from this transformation. Milk spoils quickly. Cheese concentrates its nourishment into something easier to store and carry. Salt helps that conversion succeed. You step into a shaded room where rounds of cheese rest on wooden shelves. The air is cool and slightly sour. Some surfaces are dry, others are rubbed or washed. Salt clings invisibly to the process. A shepherd can turn an unstable liquid into a portable food with a very different lifespan. That is a remarkable piece of household technology. Salt can preserve meat through another method as well. Large pieces may be packed into salt inside jars, boxes, or other containers. Layers alternate. Salt, meat, more salt. Pressure may help the crystals remain in contact with the surface. Over time, liquid drains away. The meat becomes denser. When needed, heavily salted food may require soaking or boiling to remove some of the salt before eating. This creates a curious ancient inconvenience. The thing that keeps dinner edible can also make dinner nearly inedible until you reverse part of the process. Preservation is full of compromises. No agreement has been reached on whether some early salt production sites were created mainly to serve local household needs, or whether certain operations were already aimed at larger exchange networks from their earlier stages. Archaeologists study pottery fragments, evaporation structures, settlement patterns, and trade routes to understand scale. The problem is that salt itself often disappears from the archaeological record. It dissolves. It washes away. It leaves indirect clues rather than magnificent ruins. A palace can survive as stone. A salt business may survive as stains, broken vessels, and strangely shaped pits. History sometimes favors architecture over groceries, yet the economic consequences of salt can be enormous. Communities near reliable sources gain opportunities. Settlements can develop around springs and mines. Trade paths become established. Animals carrying salt move across mountains and deserts. Markets connect regions with different resources. The food preservation needs of one community help stimulate exchange with another. Imagine a farmer far inland who has grain but little salt. A coastal producer has salt and preserved fish. Trade benefits both. The resulting networks carry more than commodities. People exchange ideas, stories, tools, customs, and news. A mineral used to preserve dinner can indirectly help connect societies. The touch of salt appears everywhere, on the hands of fishermen, on the floors of workshops, on the rims of jars, on meat hung to cure, on cheese, on vegetables, on the backs of workers hauling heavy sacks. Even animals need salt, adding further demand. Its importance is practical rather than mysterious. Salt protects time and labour. A fisherman who loses a catch loses hours of work. A herder who loses meat loses part of a herd. A household that loses stored provisions may face genuine hardship. Preservation prevents those losses. So a handful of white crystals becomes a form of insurance. You stand near the water again as afternoon light begins to soften. Workers carry baskets away from the evaporation pans. The salt inside is dry, rough, and almost painfully bright. Nearby, fish lie packed in layers. A jar of brine waits beneath a cloth cover. Nothing about the scene feels dramatic. There is no single invention ceremony. No one raises a crystal toward the sky and declares a new age. People simply discover, refine, and repeat what works. Salt pulls moisture from food. Brine surrounds it. Time changes texture. Strong flavors develop. Perishable abundance becomes something that can travel, wait, and survive. The crystals seem humble in your palm, but their effect reaches far beyond taste. They turn coastline into commerce, harvest into reserve, and fragile food into provisions sturdy enough to face the uncertain ancient world. Smoke gathers beneath the roof in slow grey layers, and you feel it before you fully see it. Your eyes sting slightly. The air tastes of resin, warm fat, damp wood, and something deeply savoury hanging just out of reach. Above the fire, strips of meat sway from wooden poles. Fish hang farther back, their surfaces darkening as the smoke curls around them. Nothing here resembles the bright flame of a cooking hearth meant to prepare a meal quickly. The fire is smaller, steadier, and carefully controlled. Its purpose is not simply to cook, it is to preserve. You sit close enough to feel warmth on your face, but the food hangs farther away, where heat rises gently and smoke lingers. The arrangement looks simple, yet it depends on judgment. Too much heat, and the outside cooks too quickly. Too little, and the food remains damp. Too much flame, and the food can scorch. Too little smoke, and the process loses part of its protective effect. Someone nearby nudges a log with a stick. The fire sighs. A fresh curl of smoke climbs toward the roof. Smoking works partly by helping food lose moisture, but smoke itself also contains compounds that can slow the growth of certain microorganisms and reduce surface spoilage. Ancient people do not need to know the chemistry. They notice that food exposed to smoke often lasts longer, especially when combined with drying, salting, or cool storage. This makes the hearth more than a place for warmth. It becomes a preservation tool. You reach toward a wooden beam above the fire. It feels warm and slightly greasy from years of smoke and cooking. The roof around it is blackened with soot. In many ancient homes, smoke does not escape neatly through a metal chimney. It drifts. It gathers. It finds cracks in the roof. It stains walls. It fills clothing. It settles into hair. Modern eyes might call the room unpleasantly smoky. Ancient food hanging overhead might call it excellent working conditions. A household that keeps a regular fire naturally creates a warm, smoky zone above it. Suspending food there can take advantage of energy already being produced for heating and cooking. There is an elegant efficiency to that. One fire serves several purposes at once. You can imagine a family hanging pieces of meat high in the rafters after a successful hunt or slaughter. The food remains out of reach of many animals while absorbing warmth and smoke over time. The smoke changes the surface first. It dries. It darkens. It adds aroma. The meat becomes firmer. Its colour deepens. Depending on the wood, the flavour changes too. Different woods produce different smoke. Hardwoods often burn differently from resinous woods. Fruit woods can contribute gentler aromas. Certain woods are avoided because they create bitter flavours or unpleasant soot. The choice of fuel becomes part of preservation knowledge. You hear someone splitting branches outside. Each piece of wood is not merely heat, it is an ingredient. This can be easy to forget in a modern kitchen where smoke is usually treated as evidence that something has gone wrong. Here, smoke is deliberately cultivated. The ideal fire may smoulder rather than blaze. Moist wood, green branches, bark, or selected plant material can increase smoke production. Yet there is still skill involved. Smoke that is too thick can deposit harsh flavours. Poorly chosen fuel can make food unpleasant. A calm, steady haze is more useful than a choking cloud. Your eyes would appreciate that distinction as well. Fish are especially suited to smoking because they spoil quickly and are often caught in large quantities at once. You enter a coastal shelter where freshly cleaned fish are threaded onto rods. Some are split open, others are left whole. The smallest dry faster. Larger fish require more preparation, so smoke and heat reach the interior effectively. You hear the squeak of a wooden rack as someone shifts its position. The fish nearest the hearth are moved farther away. Those at the edge are brought closer. The process is not passive. It requires watching, touching, smelling, turning, adjusting. The person managing the fire reads the room the way a sailor reads wind. Records confirm that smoked and dried fish become important preserved foods in many ancient and traditional societies, particularly where fishing produces seasonal abundance. Preserved fish can support communities during periods when weather prevents fishing or when catches decline. It also travels well. A fish pulled from water in one place can eventually be eaten far inland. That transformation turns coastal harvest into portable nourishment. The same is true of meat. When large animals are slaughtered, preserving part of the carcass becomes essential if fresh consumption cannot keep pace. Smoking can help extend storage time, especially when combined with curing. You watch meat rubbed with salt before it is hung. The salt draws moisture outward. The warm air continues drying. Smoke coats the surface. Several methods cooperate. Ancient preservation often works best this way. One technique supports another. There is rarely a magical single step. Instead, you see layers of protection, less water, more salt, cooler storage, protective smoke, careful handling, time. The result is food transformed slowly enough to remain useful. A piece of smoked meat becomes lighter, denser, and more intense in flavour. You cut into one. The outer surface is dark. The inside is firmer than fresh meat. The smell is unmistakable. Wood, fat, salt, time for travellers. This matters because smoked foods can provide concentrated energy without the burden of carrying fresh meat that rapidly deteriorates. For soldiers, hunters, herders, and merchants, preserved meat can become dependable road food. It may not be luxurious. It may require chewing with determination, but reliability has its own charm. You begin to notice that smoking also changes the household itself. A smoky roof protects more than food in some settings. Smoke can discourage certain insects. It may help dry wooden structures. It coats surfaces with soot and tar-like deposits. The home becomes part kitchen, part smokehouse. There may not even be a separate building. Food preservation happens in living space. You sleep beneath it. You talk beneath it. You mend tools beneath it. Your dinner hangs over your head like edible ceiling decoration. Oddly enough, in some traditional houses, smoked meat and fish hang for so long above hearths that generations of cooking smoke darken the beams almost to black. The architecture itself becomes coated with the history of countless meals. You can imagine tracing a finger over the wood. The soot comes away reluctantly. The smell never quite leaves. There is something intimate about that kind of house. Food preservation is not hidden in an appliance. It is visible every day. You look up and see winter provisions. You smell them. You judge their progress. You know exactly how much remains. Smoking also offers another advantage. It can be done when strong sunlight is unreliable. Cloudy weather may ruin outdoor drying, but a controlled hearth provides steady warmth indoors or under shelter. In damp regions, this becomes valuable. Rain may continue outside while food slowly dries above smoke. You hear water tapping against a roof. Inside, the fire crackles. The contrast feels reassuring. Weather no longer controls everything. You have created a small artificial climate, not a sophisticated one, admittedly. It still fills your clothes with smoke, but it works. The design of smoking spaces can become increasingly specialized. Some communities use pits, others use sheds, some create racks over hearths, some build enclosed structures where smoke can circulate without exposing food directly to flame. The principle remains similar. Keep food in warm, smoky air long enough to dry and absorb protective compounds. The shape of the space matters. Smoke must linger, heat must rise, food must remain far enough from direct fire. Ventilation must be controlled. Too much airflow carries smoke away. Too little makes the room unbearable and the fire difficult to manage. You find yourself admiring the quiet engineering involved. A hole in a roof can determine how smoke travels. The height of a rack can alter temperature. The thickness of a wall can hold warmth. The placement of a door can change airflow. Nothing requires a blueprint. Experience becomes architecture. You can almost hear one builder telling another that the rack is too low, while the other insists it worked perfectly last winter. Arguments about household design are probably as old as households. A curious footnote appears in the use of aromatic plants during smoking. Juniper, herbs, reeds, leaves, or particular local woods can influence both smell and flavour. In some places, these materials may also be chosen because people believe they offer medicinal or protective qualities. The line between preservation, seasoning, and ritual can become wonderfully blurred. A branch placed on a fire might be practical. It might be symbolic. It might be both. Ancient people rarely organized life into neat modern categories. Cooking is medicine. Food is offering. Smoke is preservative. Fire is protection. The same act carries several meanings. Your ears catch a faint hiss as fat drips onto warm coals. A sudden burst of smoke rises. The smell becomes richer. Someone quickly shifts the meat to prevent scorching. That small movement reveals how vulnerable the process remains. Smoking can fail. Food may stay too moist. Heat may be uneven. Insects may reach it before drying is complete. Mold can appear. Animals can steal it. A careless fire can burn too hot. Preservation reduces risk. It never eliminates it. This makes sensory knowledge essential. A skilled person checks color, texture, smell, surface dryness, firmness. The food itself provides clues. You press a piece between your fingers. It yields only slightly. You smell it. Smoke dominates, but nothing seems sour or unpleasant. Experience turns these small observations into decisions. Keep smoking. Move higher. Move lower. Turn the rack. Add fuel. Stop the process. No thermometer gives permission. The judgment belongs to you. The type of smoking also affects the final result. Food exposed to greater heat cooks while it smokes. Food kept farther from heat dries more slowly and remains closer to what modern people might call cold smoked. Ancient techniques do not always fit neatly into modern categories, but the distinction between strong heat and gentle smoke is clearly meaningful. A hotter process can produce food ready to eat sooner. A slower process may preserve texture differently. Climate, fuel, food type, and intended storage time all influence the choice. Historians still argue whether some archaeological hearth arrangements identified as smoking installations were designed specifically for food preservation, or whether ordinary cooking spaces were simply adapted when needed. The evidence can be frustratingly ambiguous. A hearth is a hearth. A rack rarely survives. Wood rots. Cord disappears. Smoke leaves stains. But stains cannot explain every activity that happened beneath them. Archaeologists study soot patterns, animal remains, building shapes, and residues to reconstruct behavior. Sometimes the best conclusion is only that people probably smoked food there. The certainty is gone. The smell, unfortunately, is gone too. Yet the logic remains convincing. Humans live beside fire for warmth and cooking. Food hangs nearby. Smoke slows spoilage. A repeated observation becomes a technique. A technique becomes tradition. Soon, particular tastes develop around it. This final point matters because preservation changes cuisine. People may begin smoking food from necessity, but eventually they enjoy the result. The aroma becomes familiar. The flavor becomes comforting. Children grow up associating smoky meat or fish with home. A preservation technique becomes identity. That is how practical habits turn into food culture. You stand near the hearth as the light outside fades. The room grows darker, but the coals glow red. Smoke rises more slowly now. Meat hangs in still rows. Fish skins catch tiny reflections from the fire. The air's warm near your knees and cooler near the floor. You hear the soft crack of a log settling into ash. Nothing dramatic happens. That is the point. Preservation works through gradual change. Moisture leaves almost invisibly. Smoke accumulates one thin layer at a time. Flavor deepens, weight decreases. The food becomes more durable with every quiet hour. You reach toward a finished piece and feel its dry surface. It carries the scent of fire without being burned. It is no longer fresh in the ordinary sense. It has become something more useful. Something that can wait. And beneath the darkened rafters, while smoke threads lazily toward the roof, you understand how an ordinary household fire can become one of the ancient world's most dependable preservation tools. You lift the lid from a clay vessel and immediately notice that something has happened inside. The smell is sour, warm, and alive. Grain, fruit, milk, vegetables, and fish all have an inconvenient habit of changing once humans gather them together. Sometimes the change is disastrous. Sometimes it is useful. Occasionally it becomes so delicious that people decide to repeat the accident on purpose. This is fermentation. At first glance, it seems almost like controlled spoilage, which is not the most reassuring phrase to hear before dinner. Yet fermentation becomes one of the most powerful ways ancient people transform fragile foods into products that last longer, taste stronger, and often become easier to digest. You do not see microorganisms, you see bubbles, you smell sourness, you notice foam, you hear faint fizzing inside a vessel, you watch a liquid thicken, you discover that yesterday's milk has become something entirely different. Without microscopes or modern microbiology, ancient people learned to guide these changes through repetition and careful observation. The process begins with invisible life. Yeasts and bacteria consume sugars and produce acids, alcohol, gases, and other compounds. These changes can make food less hospitable to many unwanted organisms. Ancient cooks do not explain it this way. They know only that certain methods work. Leave grain and water together under the right conditions, and something happens. Leave milk in a warm container, and it thickens. Place vegetables in salty liquid, and they become sour. Mix fish with salt and thyme, and the result can become an intensely flavored sauce capable of frightening a modern hotel minibar. You stand beside a basket of grain being crushed with stone. The grain is mixed with water. A paste begins to form. Some of it may be cooked, some may rest. Wild yeast drifting through the environment can colonize the mixture, along with microorganisms already present on the grain. Soon, tiny bubbles appear. The mixture rises. It smells different. Someone learns that keeping a portion of an active dough and adding it to a fresh batch makes the transformation more predictable. A starter is born, although no one gives it a fashionable name or posts daily photographs of it. Fermented dough changes bread. Instead of producing only dense, flat cakes, people can create loaves with lighter textures. The trapped gas expands inside the dough. Heat sets the structure. Bread becomes softer and more aromatic. Records confirm that leavened bread is produced in several ancient societies, and Egypt becomes especially famous for sophisticated bread-making traditions. Bread is not merely one product. Different grains, grinding methods, shapes, flavors, and baking techniques create remarkable variety. You walk past ovens and smell toasted grain, smoke, and sourdough. The scent is comforting because fermentation has become predictable enough to belong to ordinary life. A baker knows how dough should feel. A brewer knows how a mash should smell. A household knows when milk has soured pleasantly rather than dangerously. The senses remain the laboratory. Beer develops from similar ingredients. Grain contains starches that can be converted into sugars. Yeasts then turn those sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Early brewing techniques vary greatly, but the principle is ancient. You watch grain being soaked, sprouted, dried, crushed, heated, or mixed depending on local practice. Eventually a cloudy beverage appears. It may contain bits of grain. It may be thick. It may be weak by modern standards. It may be flavored with herbs or fruits. And it certainly does not arrive cold in a glass with a tiny branded coaster beneath it. Yet it has advantages. Fermentation makes grain into a drink that can be consumed, shared, traded, and stored for a useful period. Alcohol and acidity influence preservation. Beer also becomes socially important. People drink together. Workers receive rations. Offerings are made. Feasts include fermented beverages. The vessel itself becomes part of daily culture. A curious footnote appears in depictions and evidence suggesting that some ancient beers are consumed through long straws. These help drinkers avoid floating grain solids and other sediment. You lean over a communal vessel and imagine several people sipping through tubes at once. It is strangely elegant. It is also a reminder that ancient beer can be less like a clear modern drink and more like a liquid meal. Fermentation does not stop with grain. Fruit offers another inviting source of sugar. Grapes are particularly cooperative. Crush them, and the juice naturally meets yeasts present in the environment. Fermentation can begin quickly. The juice becomes wine. You stand near a press where grapes burst beneath pressure. Purple juice runs into a basin. The air smells sweet. Hands and feet become sticky. Flies become extremely interested in cultural development. The fresh juice does not remain fresh for long. If fermentation succeeds, sugar decreases while alcohol appears. The drink changes day by day. The ancient winemaker watches bubbles, color, scent, and sediment. Different containers influence the result. Clay jars become common storage vessels in many regions. Some are lined with resin or other substances to reduce leakage and alter flavor. Herbs, honey, spices, or tree resins may also be added. Wine therefore becomes a preserved agricultural product, but also a canvas for experimentation. A harvest of grapes lasts only briefly. Wine can endure far longer. That transformation allows fruit to travel through time. The same idea applies to milk. Fresh milk is notoriously perishable in warm climates. Leave it standing, and naturally occurring bacteria begin converting lactose into lactic acid. The milk becomes sour. This sounds like failure. Sometimes it is. but controlled souring can create yogurt-like products, cultured milks, and eventually the foundations of cheese-making. You sit near a pastoral camp where milk has been collected into a skin bag. Movement, warmth, and microorganisms all contribute to change. The liquid thickens, the flavour sharpens. The result may keep longer than fresh milk. This matters greatly to herding communities. Animals produce milk seasonally and daily, but people cannot always consume it immediately. Fermentation stretches its usefulness. It also makes milk portable in new forms. Thickened milk travels more easily. Curds can be separated, whey drains away, salt may be added, cheese develops. The transition from milk to cheese is one of preservation's most extraordinary transformations. A fragile liquid becomes a concentrated food capable of lasting days, weeks, months, or much longer, depending on technique. You press a fresh curd between your fingers. It feels soft and warm. As moisture leaves, it becomes firmer. Microorganisms continue shaping flavour. Rines form. Textures change. Some cheeses remain mild. Others develop enough personality to dominate the room. One scandalous aside is that strong-aged cheeses can become so pungent that ancient diners must surely have had arguments about whether the smell indicates culinary excellence or a personal attack. No written vote survives. Fermented vegetables create another kind of preservation. May you push leaves, roots, or fruits beneath salty liquid. Salt draws out moisture and suppresses many undesirable organisms while allowing certain acid-producing bacteria to thrive. Over time, the brine turns cloudy. Bubbles may appear. The vegetables soften. Their flavour becomes sour. Acidity increases. This lower acidity helps preserve the food. The important detail is submersion. Food left floating above brine may be exposed to air and unwanted growth. So ancient cooks find ways to weigh vegetables down. A stone, a small lid, a piece of pottery. Anything clean and heavy enough to keep the food beneath the surface. The jar becomes a tiny ecosystem. You cannot see the competition happening inside, but you can taste the winner. Fermentation gives vegetables an entirely different character. Crunch becomes tenderness. Fresh sharpness becomes sour depth. A harvest that would otherwise fade quickly can remain useful. And as with bread or wine, people begin wanting the preserved version for its own flavour. That change is important. Preservation stops being merely defensive. It becomes culinary invention. Fish undergo perhaps the most dramatic fermentation of all. You stand beside large containers filled with fish and salt. The mixture rests for an extended period. Enzymes break down tissues. Microbial activity transforms the contents. Eventually, a salty liquid rich in savoury flavour can be drawn off. Ancient fish sauces become prized condiments in several cultures. In the Mediterranean world, Roman households use fermented fish sauces widely. Farther east, related traditions develop independently with their own ingredients and methods. The details differ, but the logic is similar. Take something highly perishable, add salt, allow controlled transformation, create a stable, intensely flavoured ingredient. The smell during production can be formidable. You approach a workshop and understand instantly why such industries are not always welcomed beside elegant houses. Warm fish fermentation has a way of introducing itself before you reach the door. Yet the final sauce can be valued enormously. This is another recurring lesson in food history. The process can look alarming. The result can become prestigious. Scholars bicker over whether certain early fermented foods emerge primarily from deliberate experimentation or from repeated accidents that people gradually learn to reproduce. The distinction is difficult to prove. Imagine a vessel of grain left wet overnight. It begins bubbling. Someone tastes it. Perhaps the first reaction is suspicion. Perhaps curiosity wins. If the result is pleasant and no one becomes ill, the process may be remembered. Then someone attempts it again. A little leftover mixture is added to the next batch. A particular jar is preferred. A certain temperature seems better. Soon, chance becomes technique. Technique becomes tradition. Tradition becomes identity. You notice that fermentation often depends on vessels themselves. A well-used jar can harbour helpful microorganisms in tiny cracks and porous surfaces. A wooden tool can carry an established culture. A skin bag can influence milk. A household may achieve consistent results without understanding that invisible communities are being transferred from one batch to another. This gives old equipment unusual value. A new vessel may not behave exactly like an old one. A particular jar can become trusted. You can imagine a cook protecting it carefully. Do not scrub that one too aggressively. Do not use it for something else. Do not let your cousin borrow it. Some kitchen anxieties truly are timeless. Temperature matters too. Warm conditions encourage faster fermentation, but excessive heat can ruin the balance. Cold slows activity. Seasons therefore affect results. A recipe that works in spring may behave differently in summer. Ancient cooks adapt by moving jars into shade, placing them near warmth, burying them partly in cool earth, or changing timing according to weather. Again, there is no digital control panel. Your skin tells you the temperature. Your nose tells you the progress. Your ears may even catch faint bubbling. Fermentation is preservation through cooperation with change. You do not stop food from transforming. You guide the transformation towards something useful. That makes it fundamentally different from simply keeping food untouched. Milk becomes yogurt. Milk becomes cheese. Grain becomes bread. Grain becomes beer. Grapes become wine. Vegetables become pickles. Fish becomes sauce. Each transformation creates new flavors and new possibilities. You stand near a row of jars as evening cools the room. One vessel releases a faint sour aroma. Another contains thickened milk. Bread dough rests beneath cloth. A jar of vegetables sits beneath brine. Nothing is motionless, even though everything appears still. Inside each container, microscopic life is working. Sugars are disappearing. Acids are forming. Gas is collecting. Proteins are changing. The ancient household cannot see any of it. Yet through touch, scent, habit, and memory, people learn to conduct these invisible processes with remarkable skill. Fermentation turns decay's own machinery toward human purposes. It is risky enough to demand care, strange enough to inspire suspicion, and useful enough to become one of the great foundations of ancient food preservation. You descend a few careful steps into a storage space cut partly into the earth, and the temperature changes almost at once. Above you, afternoon heat presses against roofs and courtyards. Down here, the air feels cooler against your skin. The walls smell of packed soil, stone, old wood, and stored grain. A faint trace of dampness lingers near the floor, though not enough to be comforting if you are responsible for several months of food. This is one of the simplest advantages ancient people learned to use. The earth changes temperature more slowly than open air. A shallow pit, a cave, a cellar, or a partially buried room can remain cooler during hot weather and less exposed to sudden temperature swings. No machine creates the coolness. The ground does the work. You place your palm against a stone wall. It feels noticeably colder than the sunlit courtyard outside. That difference may be only a few degrees, but a few degrees can matter. Heat accelerates many forms of spoilage. Cooler storage slows chemical reactions, insect activity, and microbial growth. Ancient people do not explain any of this with modern biology, but they quickly notice that certain foods remain usable longer in shaded, cool places, so they search for them. A cave becomes valuable. A north-facing room becomes useful. A pit beneath a floor becomes practical. A building partly dug into a hillside can serve as a natural cold store. You walk deeper into a limestone chamber where jars rest against the walls. The ceiling arches above you. Water once carved this space long before anyone carried food inside. Now baskets sit on wooden supports. Clay vessels line shallow shelves. The arrangement is deliberate. Anything vulnerable to damp is kept away from the wettest surfaces. Air must move, but not too violently. Temperatures remain relatively stable. The cave is not freezing. It does not need to be. Stability itself is valuable. Imagine fresh produce kept outdoors where daytime heat rises sharply and nighttime temperatures fall. That repeated cycle can stress food and containers. Underground, those swings become gentler. You notice the quiet. Sounds from the settlement become muted. A distant footstep above feels strangely far away. The storage chamber has its own atmosphere, almost like the inside of the earth is holding its breath. Ancient communities use pits in several different ways. Some are simple holes dug into dry soil, others are lined with clay, stone, straw, wood, or plaster. Some are sealed after filling. Some remain accessible. The design depends on what is being stored and the local environment. Dry grain behaves differently from root vegetables. Wine behaves differently from fruit. Cheese has its own demands. There is no universal underground pantry. You kneel beside a storage pit and peer into its narrow opening. The entrance is smaller than the space below. That shape can help reduce exposure to warm air and make sealing easier. It also makes you appreciate the courage of anyone asked to climb inside and clean it. The pit may be filled with grain and then closed with packed clay, a stone slab, wooden cover, or other barrier. Sealing helps keep out pests and moisture. It can also change the air inside. As living grain, insects, and microorganisms consume oxygen, the atmosphere may become less favourable to some pests. Ancient people do not measure oxygen concentration. They simply noticed that properly sealed stores can work. Records confirm that underground grain pits are used across many ancient agricultural regions, especially where soils are dry enough to prevent serious moisture problems. The success of such pits depends heavily on location. Dig into waterlogged ground, and your grain reserve can become a large experiment in disappointment. Dry soil is preferable. Drainage matters. The height of the water table matters. The season matters. The shape of the pit matters. Preservation is never just technique. It is geography applied carefully. You move toward a clay-lined chamber where barley has been stored. The kernels make a soft rushing sound as someone pours a basket into the opening. Each basket represents labour already invested. Sowing, weeding, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, drying, transport. Losing that grain to dampness or rodents would mean losing all of those hours at once. Storage is therefore a form of protection for human effort. You might think of a granary as a bank. The currency is food, the interest rate is survival, and the mice are extremely motivated financial criminals. Rodents remain a constant threat underground and above ground alike. A pit may be difficult for them to enter if properly sealed, but cracks are enough. Ancient people used stone barriers, raised containers, traps, cats, dogs, snakes, and constant inspection. No method is perfect. If you hear scratching in the dark, you investigate quickly. Insects create quieter problems. Grain beetles can multiply inside a store without announcing themselves. A household may open a container weeks later and discover that someone else has been eating very well. Cooler conditions help because many insect species become less active when temperatures fall. This gives underground storage another advantage. Not cold enough to freeze, cool enough to slow trouble. You step into another chamber where root vegetables are stored. Here the air is slightly more humid. That is intentional. Certain roots keep better when they do not dry out completely. A carrot, turnip, onion, tuber, or similar crop needs different conditions from grain. Too wet, and rot begins. Too dry, and the food shrivels. The ancient household must find a middle ground. Roots may be buried in sand, packed in straw, placed in pits, or stored in cool earth. The ground protects them from direct sunlight and excessive warmth. You brush loose soil from a root pulled from storage. Its skin is rough and cold. It looks almost as though it has been waiting underground exactly where it grew. This is preservation by imitation. Keep the harvested plant in conditions resembling the soil from which it came. Do not wake it too violently into the open air. A curious footnote appears in the practice of storing some vegetables in clamps, low outdoor mounds covered with straw and earth. The food sits inside a carefully shaped heap while layers around it provide insulation to a passerby. The structure may look like an unremarkable mound of dirt. Inside, a dinner is spending the winter in a very modest hotel. The principle is clever. Straw traps air, earth blocks wind and sudden temperature changes. A small vent can allow excess warmth or moisture to escape. The vegetables remain protected from frost while staying cool. Similar methods appear in different forms across agricultural societies. People learn that insulation is not only useful for keeping heat in, it can also keep heat out. You feel this when you enter a thick-walled storeroom. The sun outside is fierce, but the interior remains dim and cool. Stone, mud brick, and packed earth absorb heat slowly. Small windows reduce direct sunlight. A shaded doorway prevents hot air from rushing in. Architecture becomes preservation technology. The position of the room can matter as much as its walls. A cellar beneath a house benefits from the mass of the building above. A chamber cut into a hillside benefits from surrounding earth. A cave facing away from strong afternoon sun stays cooler than an exposed entrance. Ancient builders do not need mathematical models to recognize these differences. They live with the landscape long enough to know where heat settles and where coolness remains. You picture a household choosing where to place jars. The warm corner is avoided. The shaded wall is preferred. Containers that need checking stay near the entrance. Long-term stores go deeper inside. Heavy jars rest on the floor. Fragile food sit on shelves away from accidental kicks. Someone has clearly stepped on something important at least once. Human organization often begins immediately after human inconvenience. Cool storage works particularly well for liquids. Wine and beer can benefit from stable temperatures. Large jars may be placed in underground rooms or partially buried. The surrounding earth buffers sudden heat. You run your fingers over the neck of a ceramic vessel. The clay feels cool. Inside, liquid remains protected from direct sunlight. In some regions, large storage jars are sunk into floors or buried to their shoulders. This makes them difficult to move, which is inconvenient if you suddenly decide the dining room would look better rearranged, but excellent for temperature stability. The vessel becomes part of the building. Oil may also be stored in cool, dark conditions. Light and heat can damage flavors and encourage deterioration. A shaded storeroom helps. Again, people may not understand oxidation in modern chemical terms. They know that oil kept properly tastes better for longer. Observation creates rule. Keep it cool. Keep it dark. Keep it sealed. Cheese offers another interesting use for caves and underground rooms. Certain cheeses improve in cool, humid environments where drying happens slowly and microbial communities shape the rind. You enter a natural cave where rounds sit on shelves. The air is damp enough to soften your skin. A mineral scent mixes with milk and earth. Tiny droplets cling to stone. The temperature remains steady from day to day. This consistency can encourage predictable aging. Some cheeses develop molds or surface cultures associated with particular caves or storage environments. The place itself becomes part of the flavor. That idea feels almost magical. A chamber of rock influences dinner, but the mechanism is practical. Temperature, humidity, airflow, and microorganisms all work together. One scandalous aside is that caves used for food can also be attractive to bats, rodents, insects, and other creatures with no respect whatsoever for private property. Ancient storekeepers must decide which part of the cave belongs to the household and which part belongs to nature. Nature rarely accepts the boundary without negotiation. Smoke, barriers, dogs, doors, sealed jars, and elevated shelves all help. You notice scratch marks near one wooden support. Someone has been attempting a burglary. Cold environments offer even greater advantages. In mountainous regions or high latitudes, caves and underground chambers may remain naturally chilled for long periods. Permafrost, cold rock, shaded ravines, and deep winter frost can preserve foods far more effectively than warm region cellars. People living in such landscapes can exploit conditions unavailable elsewhere. Frozen ground becomes a natural freezer. A deep pit may remain cold well into warmer months. Meat and fish stored there can last significantly longer. Yet cold creates its own problems. Repeated freezing and thawing damages food. Water entering a chamber can freeze and crack containers. Snowmelt brings moisture. So even in cold regions, storage requires planning. Nothing in preservation is entirely free. Nature gives an advantage and then adds terms and conditions. You descend farther into a purpose-built cellar. Wooden steps creak beneath your feet. The air becomes still. Jars are arranged in rows. A small opening near the ceiling provides ventilation. This matters because completely stagnant air can encourage dampness and mold. Yet too much ventilation brings warm outside air. The correct balance depends on climate and season. A cool night may be used to refresh the air. A hot afternoon may call for keeping the chamber closed. Doors become temperature control. Open, close, wait, observe. The simplicity hides sophistication. People manipulate airflow without fans. They manipulate temperature without compressors. They manipulate humidity without electronic sensors. They use architecture, timing, and common sense. No agreement has been reached on whether some ancient subterranean chambers discovered near settlements were designed originally for food storage or later adapted from ritual, domestic, or defensive uses. An underground space can serve many purposes across generations. A chamber may begin as a quarry. Later, it becomes storage. Later still, it becomes a shelter. Archaeologists find jars, grain remains, shelves, plaster, drainage channels, and ventilation openings. But interpreting the original purpose can be difficult. Stone survives. Intentions do not. Still, food leaves traces. Seeds accumulate in cracks. Ceramic vessels break. Organic residues stain floors. Rodent bones collect in corners. Charred grain survives fires. Each clue reveals how important cool storage becomes. You stand again near the entrance of the cellar. Outside, the day is bright. Inside, darkness wraps around rows of containers. You notice how little energy the system consumes. None. Once built, the earth does most of the work. That is perhaps the most elegant part. Ancient people cannot make cold whenever they want. They can, however, find places where cold already exists. They can trap it, protect it, build around it, dig toward it. The landscape becomes a partner. A cave wall moderates heat. A cellar floor cools a jar. Packed earth shelters roots. A sealed pit protects grain. A shaded chamber steadies wine. Food lasts because humans learn to place it where change happens more slowly. You climb toward the surface and feel warmth returning to your face. Behind you, the underground room remains cool and dim. Nothing moves quickly there. That is precisely why it works. In a world governed by seasons, the safest pantry is often not a container at all. It is the ground beneath your feet. You lift the lid from a broad clay jar and find something unexpected beneath it. A glossy layer of oil covers the food inside. Nothing moves, nothing bubbles. The surface simply shines in the dim light, smooth and golden, separating what lies below from the air above. This is another ancient strategy for keeping food usable. Instead of removing moisture, lowering temperature, or encouraging fermentation, people sometimes protect food by covering it. The idea is wonderfully practical. Air carries dust, spores, insects, and countless invisible agents of change. If food can be shielded from direct exposure, some forms of deterioration slow down. Ancient households discover several materials suited to this job: honey, oil, rendered animal fat, wax, resin, clay seals. Each behaves differently, but all can create some kind of barrier. You dip a spoon into a jar of honey, it moves slowly. The texture is thick enough to resist your hand, and the scent is floral, warm, and faintly wild. Honey is unusual because it contains very little available water and a great deal of sugar. This makes it difficult for many microorganisms to grow in it. Ancient people do not know this in scientific terms. They simply know that honey keeps remarkably well. A jar can sit for a long time without behaving like most fresh foods. That alone makes it valuable. But honey can also help preserve other ingredients. Fruit, nuts, herbs, and certain prepared foods may be immersed, coated, or mixed with it depending on local custom. The sweetness changes flavour, of course. Preservation rarely leaves food completely unchanged. A tart fruit becomes rich. A nut becomes sticky. A medicinal herb becomes considerably easier to swallow. Honey therefore sits at the intersection of food, preservation, medicine, ritual, and luxury. Records can confirm that honey is prized in several ancient civilizations and appears in cooking, offerings, remedies, and stored preparations. You can understand its attraction immediately. It tastes pleasant. It travels reasonably well in sealed containers. It provides concentrated energy, and it does not demand refrigeration. Bees perform most of the complicated chemistry themselves, which is an arrangement humans have always found admirable. You stand beside a row of woven hives. The air hums. Beekeepers work carefully, because preservation begins with acquiring the preservative, and the preservative is currently defended by thousands of tiny armed employees. Smoke may be used to calm the bees. Comb is removed. Honey drips into containers. Wax is collected too. Almost nothing is wasted. The honey can enter the pantry. The wax can become another protective material. Beeswax is useful because it can be softened by warmth and hardened again as it cools. You watch someone rub wax around the lid of a ceramic jar. The material fills small gaps. A cloth or stopper may sit beneath it. The wax creates a tighter seal. It does not make the vessel perfectly airtight by modern standards, but it reduces exposure, and that can be enough to improve storage. The transformation of a simple lid into a sealed container is easy to overlook, yet containers are only as good as their closures. A beautiful jar with a loose lid is essentially an invitation. Air enters. Insects enter. Moisture enters. Occasionally a curious child enters as much as physically possible, so ancient households pay attention to the mouth of the vessel. Clay can be pressed around it. Wax can fill cracks. Resin can coat surfaces. Fabric can be tied over an opening. Wooden stoppers can be fitted tightly. The seal becomes part of the preservation method. You run a finger over hardened wax around one jar. The surface is slightly uneven. Someone applied it by hand. That irregularity is useful. It tells you this is practical work, not perfect manufacturing. The goal is not beauty. The goal is keeping the contents protected. Oil performs a different trick. A layer of oil floating above food can reduce its contact with air. This is especially useful for certain cooked foods, cheeses, herbs, vegetables, sauces, and other preparations. Olive oil becomes particularly important around the Mediterranean. You pour a little into a shallow dish. Its surface reflects the lamp. The smell is grassy and peppery. A piece of food submerged beneath it is separated from the surrounding atmosphere. The oil forms a physical barrier. It also adds flavour and calories. This is preservation that improves dinner at the same time. Of course, oil has its own enemies. Heat, light, and long exposure to air can make it deteriorate. So the oil itself must be stored carefully. Dark vessels help. Cool rooms help. Well-fitted closures help. you begin to appreciate the layers of protection involved. Food is covered by oil. Oil sits inside pottery. Pottery stands in shade. The opening is sealed. Each measure helps the next. Ancient preservation is often less like one brilliant trick and more like a stack of sensible precautions. You approach another vessel where cheese rests beneath oil. The surface looks almost polished. Herbs float near the top. Their scent rises as the lid opens. The oil protects the cheese from direct air exposure while carrying the flavors of thyme, rosemary, or other local plants into it. You taste a small piece. It is salty, rich, and aromatic. The barrier has become seasoning. That is a recurring pleasure of preservation. The practical solution becomes part of cuisine. Fat from animals can perform a similar function. You watch cooked meat placed into a container while still warm. Rendered fat is poured around it. At first the fat is liquid. As it cools, it becomes opaque and firm. The meat disappears beneath a solid protective layer. Now the air has difficulty reaching the food directly. The method works especially well when the meat itself is thoroughly cooked and moisture is limited. The fat creates a seal. This technique appears in different forms across many societies. Sometimes meat is packed tightly into crocks. Sometimes pieces are entirely covered. Sometimes the fat becomes almost like a lid that must be broken before the food can be reached. You tap the hardened surface with a spoon. It gives a dull little knock. Dinner is underneath. There is something deeply satisfying about that. A protective crust between your food and the outside world. You can imagine opening such a vessel during a lean season. The fat is scraped aside. The meat emerges. It may be reheated. It may be mixed into grain or vegetables. Nothing about it resembles freshly cooked meat, but that is not the point. It is still there. Rendered fat has another benefit. It is itself a concentrated source of energy. In societies where calories can be difficult to secure, wasting fat would make little sense, so it becomes cooking medium, food, lamp fuel in some contexts, and preservation material. One substance performs several jobs. Efficiency is not a fashionable principle here. It is ordinary life. A curious footnote appears in the strange durability of honey itself. Archaeologists have occasionally encountered ancient honey or honey-like residues in sealed vessels, and the idea of extremely old honey surviving for astonishing lengths of time has become famous for good reason. Pure honey can remain stable under suitable conditions because its chemistry is naturally hostile to many forms of spoilage. That does not mean every ancient jar is automatically safe to eat, which is perhaps disappointing to anyone dreaming of a 3,000-year-old breakfast. Still, its durability is remarkable. You can see why ancient people treat it as special. Honey is sweet in a world where concentrated sweetness is not always easy to obtain. It keeps, it carries aromas, it can coat food, it can be offered to gods, it can soothe the throat, it can bind ingredients together, it is almost suspiciously useful. Wax has its own quiet importance. Beeswax can line containers, it can coat lids, it can protect certain foods from moisture. In some cases, waxed cloth or other coverings help reduce exposure. Resins can perform similar tasks. Tree resins are sticky, aromatic, and water-resistant. Ancient craftspeople use them for waterproofing vessels, especially containers holding liquids. A ceramic jar is naturally porous. Coating the inside with resin can reduce seepage. The resin may also flavor what is stored inside. Wine kept in resin-lined vessels can develop a distinctive taste. Modern drinkers may interpret that taste as traditional. An ancient drinker may simply call it Tuesday. Preservation reshapes expectations. If every generation grows up with a certain flavor caused by storage technology, that flavor becomes normal. You enter a storeroom where amphorae stand upright in rows. Their narrow necks make sealing easier. Stoppers fit into the openings. Some are covered with resin, plaster, clays, or wax. Labels or marks may identify contents. Vessel with a wide mouth is convenient for reaching inside. A vessel with a narrow neck is often easier to close securely. Design follows preservation needs. The shape of pottery is therefore not merely artistic, it can be practical engineering. A narrow opening reduces the area exposed to air. Handles make transport easier. Pointed bases allow certain amphorae to be packed efficiently into ship holds or supported in racks. Thick walls resist breakage. Clay becomes logistics. You grip one handle and immediately understand why. A full jar is heavy. Oil, wine, honey, or preserved foods must be carried carefully. Dropping a large container means losing both food and pottery at once. It is the ancient equivalent of deleting a pantry and smashing the cupboard simultaneously. No one wants to explain that accident to the household. Sealing matters especially during transport. A jar bouncing in a cart or ship encounters dust, rain, insects, and motion. A poor closure leaks. A strong seal protects. Merchants therefore depend on packaging as much as contents. A product that cannot survive the journey cannot become reliable trade. Honey, oil, wine, sauces, and preserved foods travel because containers and seals make movement possible. You hear the creak of rope tightening around jars. Straw reeds cushion them. Wooden frames hold them in place. The preservation story expands from kitchen skill into transportation technology. Scholars still argue whether some sealed ancient vessels were intended mainly to exclude air, or whether their closures were designed more broadly to prevent leakage, contamination, theft, and moisture. The answer is probably not identical in every place. A stopper can serve several purposes at once. That makes interpretation difficult. A wax seal might preserve food. It might also prove that a merchant has not opened the jar. A clay plug might keep insects out. It might also prevent servants from sampling the contents. Food security and household suspicion can cooperate nicely. You can imagine the owner examining a broken seal. Someone has been in the honey. There are only so many suspects. Children look guilty. The household dog looks unusually innocent. No trial record is required. Seals also carry social meaning. Stamp impressions can identify workshops, officials, estates, or producers. A closure becomes a label. The container tells you not only what is inside, but sometimes where it came from or who controlled it. Preservation and administration meet at the mouth of a jar. Even the humble act of closing food can become part of taxation, trade, and authority. You return to the table where several materials sit together. Honey shines amber in a small bowl. Olive oil catches the lamplight. A lump of beeswax rests beside a knife. Rendered fat cools in a ceramic cup. Resin gives off a pine-like scent. Each material has a different texture. Sticky, slippery, firm, greasy, brittle when cold, soft when warmed. Ancient cooks and craftspeople know these textures intimately. They understand when wax is warm enough to spread. They know how thickly fat should cover meat. They notice when oil has turned unpleasant. They know whether a stopper fits tightly. Knowledge lives in the hands. You press a lid into place. Wax seals the edge. Your thumb smooths the final gap. The gesture is small, but it changes what happens inside the vessel. The food is no longer simply sitting in a room. It has a barrier, a boundary, a little protected world. The lid blocks insects. The seal reduces airflow. The coating protects surfaces. The jar keeps dust away. Several modest defences work together. And in the soft glow of the storeroom, surrounded by the scent of oil, honey, wax, and clay, you realize that preserving food sometimes depends not on changing the food at all, but on changing what is allowed to reach it. You step into a vast granary courtyard where the air tastes faintly of dust. Workers move in steady lines carrying baskets of barley and wheat. Grain pours from one container into another with a dry rushing sound, almost like water. Except this river can be stored for months and measured into rations long after the fields have turned brown. For a large ancient settlement, grain is more than food. It is stability. A sack of grain can become bread, porridge, beer, cakes, wages, offerings, seed for planting, or emergency reserves. Unlike many fresh foods, properly dried cereals can survive for long periods if kept away from moisture, insects, rodents, and excessive heat. That makes the granary one of the most important buildings in many agricultural societies. You enter through a shaded doorway and notice how carefully the space is arranged. The floor is raised above the surrounding ground. This may help reduce dampness and improve airflow beneath stored food. The walls are thick, openings are limited. Some sections contain bins, others hold large jars. In another corner, workers pour grain into a storage chamber through an opening above. Everything seems designed around one question. How do you protect thousands of meals at once? Household preservation is difficult enough. City-scale preservation is an entirely different challenge. A family can inspect a few jars. An administrator responsible for a granary must protect enormous quantities of food from problems that can spread quickly. One damp corner can encourage mold. One rodent colony can multiply. One insect infestation can move through a store. One careless spark can destroy an entire reserve. So large granaries require organization as much as architecture. You hear someone calling out quantities while a scribe records deliveries. A basket is emptied. A number is spoken. Another basket arrives. The process repeats. Records confirm that ancient Egyptian administrations carefully tracked grain collected, stored, and distributed through institutional systems connected with temples, estates, officials, and labor forces. Similar concerns appear in other ancient societies where rulers collect taxes in kind. Grain often becomes a practical form of revenue. You cannot spend wheat in quite the same way you spend a metal coin, but everyone needs to eat. That gives stored grain enormous political value. A ruler who controls food reserves can support workers, armies, officials, and cities. A temple with large stores can distribute rations. A palace can collect agricultural surplus. A community granary can provide protection against poor harvests. Food becomes administration. The granary becomes a quiet center of power. You walk along a narrow passage between storage bins. Each compartment helps separate grain. This limits the damage if one batch develops a problem. Different crops can be kept apart. New grain can be distinguished from older stock. Seed grain may be reserved separately from grain intended for eating. That distinction is crucial. If a hungry community consumes every last kernel during a shortage, there may be nothing to plant when the next growing season arrives. Saving seed requires discipline. You can imagine the tension. Food sits in front of you. People are hungry. Yet part of that food belongs to a future harvest. The granary therefore protects not only meals, but possibility. Ancient farmers also learn that storage begins before grain reaches the building. Harvest timing matters, threshing matters, winnowing matters, drying matters enormously. If grain is stored while too damp, trouble can begin from within. Moist kernels support mold and microbial activity. Stored grain can warm as biological activity increases, and that heat can accelerate deterioration. A full granary may look motionless, but the grain is not truly inert. It breathes faintly. It exchanges moisture. It reacts to temperature. The larger the store, the more carefully conditions must be managed. You scoop a handful from a basket. The kernels feel hard and dry. You bite one carefully. It cracks rather than bends. That simple test can provide useful information. Experienced handlers judge grain by touch, sound, smell, and appearance. A musty odor warns of dampness. Clumping is suspicious. Discoloration can signal trouble. Insects may appear near the surface. The grain itself communicates, provided someone pays attention. Ventilation becomes important. Airflow can help remove excess heat and moisture, especially in dry climates. But opening a granary carelessly can also invite humid air, insects, birds, or thieves. So ventilation must be controlled. Small openings can allow air to move while limiting access. Raised floors may reduce contact with damp soil. Storage structures can be positioned to take advantage of prevailing winds. Walls may be plastered to close cracks where pests could hide. You run your fingertips over a smooth interior surface. It is easier to clean than rough stone. That matters. Old grain trapped in cracks can harbour insects that infest the next harvest. Cleaning between storage cycles becomes part of preservation. Empty the bin, sweep, scrape, repair cracks, dry the space, then refill it. Maintenance is not glamorous, but preservation depends on it. Ancient food security often rests on somebody doing extremely unexciting work very carefully. You can almost hear a tired worker wondering whether history will remember the person who spent 3 days sweeping beetles from a storage room. Probably not, but the grain remembers. Pests are persistent. Rodents gnaw through baskets. Birds find openings. Beetles hide inside kernels. Moths lay eggs. The granary attracts an entire community of creatures who are delighted by centralized food distribution. Cats become especially useful in grain storing societies because they hunt rodents around homes, fields, and storerooms. Their relationship with humans is not built on affection alone. A cat near a granary has a job. The cat may not acknowledge this employment arrangement. Naturally, it considers itself management. Dogs, traps, sealed containers, smooth walls, and human guards all contribute to pest control. Some grain stores use elevated platforms that make access harder for rodents. Wooden supports may be fitted with barriers that prevent animals climbing easily. Storage jars can be closed with lids. Bins can be plastered. The goal is never perfect protection. It is reducing loss enough to keep the reserve useful. Insects require subtler responses. Some communities mix ash, dust, aromatic plants, oils, or other materials with grain in attempts to discourage pests. The effectiveness varies depending on substance, insect species, climate, and technique. Even simple ash can alter the physical environment around stored kernels, making movement more difficult for some insects and helping keep surfaces dry. A curious footnote is that ancient grain protection sometimes includes plants chosen for strong smells, bitter compounds, or traditional pest-repelling reputations. Leaves, herbs, or plant ashes may be placed among stored crops. Some probably help, some may help only a little, and some may simply make the granary smell impressively medicinal. You inhale near one basket and catch something sharp beneath the grain dust. Perhaps crushed leaves, perhaps smoke residue, perhaps the ancient equivalent of someone insisting that one particular herb keeps every bug away because their grandmother said so. Large storage also requires rotation. Older grain should generally be used before newer grain if quality remains acceptable. Otherwise, a reserve can sit forgotten until deterioration becomes obvious. This introduces accounting. Which bin was filled first? How much remains? Where did it come from? Who owns it? Who is entitled to receive it? Suddenly, grain preservation needs scribes. You watch marks being made on a tablet or writing surface. The symbols may record quantities, deliveries, withdrawals, or rations. Administration becomes another preservation tool. A perfectly designed granary is useless if no one knows what is inside. Records can prevent hoarding, confusion, theft, and accidental neglect. Of course, records can also create arguments. Someone believes they delivered 10 baskets. The official insists it was 9. A third person is certain one basket belonged to their cousin. Human bureaucracy has entered the building. In Mesopotamian cities, grain and barley play major roles in ration systems and institutional economies. Workers can receive measured food allocations. Temples and palaces manage agricultural products. The ability to store large harvests makes this possible. A ration promised next month only matters if the food still exists next month. Preservation therefore supports labour organisation. The connection can become immense. Builders need food, canal workers need food, soldiers need food, craft specialists who do not spend every day farming need food. Urban life depends on agricultural surplus surviving long enough to reach people who did not grow it themselves. You look around the granary again and realise that every wall supports specialisation. A potter can spend more time making vessels because someone else produces and stores grain. A metal worker can work at a furnace. A scribe can spend hours writing. A mason can build monumental architecture. Cities become possible partly because food can be concentrated and preserved. The granary is not visually impressive compared with a temple or palace. Yet without it, the temple and palace become much harder to maintain. There is gentle irony in that. History remembers stone monuments. The people building them are often thinking about lunch. Stored grain also becomes vital during military campaigns. Armies consume enormous quantities of food. A large force cannot simply wander through the countryside hoping every village has prepared dinner. Commanders need supply systems. Grain is useful because it can be transported in bulk and turned into several kinds of food. Soldiers may grind it, boil it, bake it, or receive prepared rations. Pack animals can carry sacks. Ships can move much larger quantities. Warehouses near ports and roads become strategic assets. Protecting food can be as important as protecting weapons. An army without provisions does not remain an army for very long. It becomes a large collection of hungry people with increasingly poor morale. The same principle applies to cities during siege. Stored grain can determine how long inhabitants endure isolation. Defenders may carefully ration supplies. Authorities may control prices. People may be forbidden to waste grain. The reserve becomes a clock. Every day consumes part of it. A well-stocked city can hold out longer. A poorly stocked one becomes vulnerable. This gives granaries a defensive significance that is easy to overlook. Walls protect people from enemies. Granaries protect them from time. The danger of fire remains constant. Dry grain burns. Wooden beams burn. Baskets burn. A warehouse filled with agricultural produce can become catastrophic if flames spread. So fire sources must be controlled. Cooking may be kept away from main stores. Lamps require care. Walls of mud, brick or stone can limit spread. Separate storage compartments may prevent one accident destroying everything. You smell old smoke on a wall and imagine how frightening even a small flame would be in such a place. Water is dangerous too, in the opposite way. Flooding can ruin grain without a single spark. This is particularly important near rivers, where fertile floodplains produce abundant crops but seasonal water must be respected. Storage buildings may therefore stand on raised ground. Floors can be elevated. Drainage channels redirect runoff. Plaster helps resist moisture. The same river that feeds the harvest can destroy the reserve if poorly managed. Ancient agriculture is a constant negotiation with water. Too little, and crops fail. Too much, and stores rot. Somewhere in between lies prosperity. Scholars bicker over how centralized certain ancient grain systems truly are. Monumental storage buildings and administrative records can suggest strong institutional control, but households, villages, temples, estates, merchants, and local authorities may all manage food at the same time. The existence of a royal granary does not mean every kernel belongs to the king. Economic life is usually messier than official inscriptions imply. A ruler may claim broad control. Local farmers may experience something much more complicated. Archaeologists therefore compare building capacity, settlement size, crop remains, written accounts, and patterns of distribution. How much food could a granary actually hold? Who used it? Was it filled every year? Did it store taxes, emergency reserves, commercial grain, or all three? The building does not answer easily, it simply waits. You climb a short stair to an upper platform. Below, Grain fills compartments in different shades of gold and brown. Workers seem smaller from here. Baskets arrive steadily. Dust catches in shafts of sunlight. You hear counting, scraping, footsteps, the heavy thump of a lid closing. This is food preservation on a civic scale. No single household could manage such quantities alone. Organisation allows thousands of individual harvests to become collective reserves. That changes what a society can attempt. Cities can grow. Workforces can specialise. Trade can expand. Officials can promise rations. Governments can respond to shortages, at least when management works, and sometimes it does not. Corruption, poor accounting, warfare, insects, weather, or simple incompetence can empty stores faster than expected. A granary is not automatically security. It is potential security. Someone must maintain it. Someone must inspect it. Someone must keep accurate records. Someone must resist the temptation to quietly remove a few sacks. Human weakness remains one pest no architecture completely excludes. Still, the system is remarkably powerful. You take one last handful of grain and let it fall between your fingers. Each kernel is tiny. Together, millions of them can feed a city. That is the secret of the granary. It turns countless small harvests into something larger than any single field. Walls hold the grain. Air keeps it dry. Guards discourage theft. Cats patrol for rodents. Scribes count supplies. Workers rotate stores. Farmers bring new harvests. The entire arrangement protects time, labour, and social order inside one dusty building. And as the last basket of the day empties with that soft rushing sound, the granary feels less like a warehouse and more like the quiet stomach of an ancient city, waiting patiently for everyone to become hungry. You step into a courtyard at the height of summer and feel heat radiating from stone beneath your sandals. The air barely moves. A servant crosses the yard carrying a covered ceramic bowl, and when the lid is lifted, something remarkable appears inside. Snow, not much of it, just a small mound packed around a dish of fruit, yet the nearest mountain is far beyond the city walls, and the last winter storm disappeared months ago. The cold in front of you has travelled through space and time. Long before mechanical refrigeration, ancient societies discover ways to collect winter snow and ice, protect it from heat, transport it over surprising distances, and store it deep underground. Unlike sun-drying or ordinary cellar storage, this method demands organisation. Cold must be captured while nature provides it. Then it must somehow survive until nature no longer does. That makes ice storage expensive. Labourers gather it, animals carry it, buildings shelter it, owners pay for it. The result often becomes associated with wealthy households, royal courts, medical treatments, elite dining, and public prestige. Cold itself can become a luxury. You follow a road upward into the hills during winter. Snow covers the slopes in pale layers. Workers carry baskets, shovels, wooden tools, and woven mats. They are not here merely to enjoy the scenery. They are harvesting winter. Snow is packed tightly into containers. Ice may be cut from frozen ponds, pools, rivers, or specially prepared basins where local climate allows. The work is uncomfortable. Cold water seeps into clothing. Hands become numb. Blocks are heavy. The ground is slippery. A person carrying ice quickly discovers that frozen water has very little sympathy for human dignity. Still, the effort has value. Dense ice survives longer than loose snow because less surface area is exposed to warm air. Packed snow can also be compressed until it forms hard masses. Workers learn to gather the cleanest material available and move it quickly towards storage. Timing matters. Transport during cool nights reduces melting. Shaded routes help. Insulating materials can slow heat transfer. Straw, reeds, sawdust in later traditions, wool, branches, dry vegetation. The goal is simple: keep warm air away. You touch a bundle wrapped around a block of ice. The outer straw feels dry and ordinary. Inside, cold remains trapped. The insulation does not create cold, it merely delays its escape. That distinction is the entire foundation of ancient ice-keeping. Heat is always trying to enter. The storage system tries to make the journey difficult. You arrive at a deep structure dug into the earth. Its entrance is narrow. Thick walls surround a chamber below. The design varies widely across regions, but several principles appear again and again. Put the ice somewhere shaded, surround it with insulating material, reduce exposure to warm outside air, allow meltwater to drain away, keep the chamber deep enough that surrounding earth moderates temperature. The last point is especially important. If melting water collects beneath stored ice, it can accelerate loss. A drain at the bottom allows liquid water to escape rather than pooling around the remaining mass. You descend carefully. The temperature drops. Your breath feels cooler. Inside, workers pack snow and ice into dense layers. Straw or other insulating material may separate the frozen mass from warm walls. The floor slopes slightly toward drainage. The chamber above may be roofed with thick masonry or earth. A second door or covered passage can reduce the amount of hot air entering whenever someone visits. This is not a freezer. Some melting is inevitable. The goal is not perfect preservation. It is survival by percentage. If enough ice remains several months later, the system succeeds. That idea feels slightly strange to a modern mind accustomed to expecting ice cubes whenever a button is pressed. Here, every surviving block represents winter labour. Cold is inventory. You can almost imagine an administrator counting it. Records confirm that rulers and wealthy households in parts of the ancient Mediterranean, Near East, South Asia, and East Asia used stored snow or ice for cooling drinks, preparing foods, treating illness, and displaying status. The details differ by place and period. In some regions, snow is brought down from mountains. Elsewhere, winter ice is collected locally and placed into pits or specialized storage chambers. Persia becomes especially famous for sophisticated cold storage traditions, including structures designed to preserve ice in hot climates. You stand beside one such desert landscape and appreciate the contradiction. The sun is fierce, the air is dry. Yet architecture and seasonal planning make it possible to keep frozen water far longer than you might expect. Some systems take advantage of clear winter nights. Shallow pools expose water to cold night air. Under favorable conditions, thin layers freeze. Workers gather the ice and move it into storage. High walls may shade the pools from daytime sun. Wind, dry air, radiative cooling, and carefully chosen locations all contribute. The result looks almost like someone has persuaded the desert to manufacture winter. Nothing supernatural is happening, only patient engineering. Still, it feels impressive. A curious footnote appears in accounts of wealthy diners using snow to chill wine or other beverages. Imagine the social message. Your guest arrives sweating from summer heat. You offer a drink made cold by snow transported from distant mountains. The temperature itself announces wealth. Anyone can pour wine. Not everyone can pour winter into the cup. Elite hosts understand this perfectly. Ancient luxury often depends less on the object itself than on the difficulty of obtaining it. A rare spice travels hundreds of miles. A shell comes from a distant coast. A fruit appears out of season. Snow arrives during summer. The improbable becomes prestigious. You raise a chilled cup and feel condensation forming against your fingers. That tiny sensation tells a story involving mountains, labourers, pack animals, storage chambers, insulation, drainage, and money. Nothing about the cold is effortless. Ice may also be used to cool food indirectly. Containers can be placed near stored ice or packed into snow. Fruit can be chilled. Dishes can be served cold. Certain ingredients may remain usable longer when temperatures fall. But ancient ice storage does not replace all other preservation methods. There simply is not enough frozen material, and maintaining it is too expensive. Cold becomes selective. You cool what matters most. A medical preparation, a special drink, delicate fruit, food intended for an elite table, perhaps meat for a short period. You do not build an ancient ice house so every onion can enjoy luxurious accommodations. That would be an ambitious use of resources. Medical writers in several ancient traditions also associate cooling with treatments for fever, swelling, pain, or other conditions. Snow and cold water can therefore enter the world of medicine as well as cuisine. This creates another reason for elites and institutions to maintain supplies. A stored block of ice is not only refreshing, it may be considered therapeutic. You move deeper into the chamber and notice how tightly the ice has been packed. Air gaps are undesirable because circulating warm air encourages melting. The more solid the mass, the more slowly its interior warms. Workers stamp or compress snow. Loose fragments are pushed together. Layers become dense. A large mass survives better than many small pieces. There is a quiet logic to this. A single snowball disappears quickly in warm air. A mountain of snow lasts much longer. The ancient ice house attempts to build a tiny artificial mountain underground. The shape of the storage chamber helps. Some are deep pits, some have domed roofs, some are covered by thick earth. Some combine above-ground walls with subterranean wells. Builders use local materials, mud brick, stone, plaster, timber where available. Insulating layers may be added between surfaces. Exterior walls can be extremely thick. The architecture is not decorative. Every layer delays heat. You place your hand against an inner wall. It is cool and slightly damp. A drop of water slides toward the floor. Melting never fully stops. The chamber is slowly losing its treasure. Workers understand this. They may open the storage only when necessary. The door is kept closed. Ice is removed quickly. The remaining mass is covered again. Efficiency matters because every warm breath entering the chamber consumes a tiny portion of winter. You can imagine a servant lingering with the door open and receiving an immediate lecture from whoever manages the store. Some household rules truly write themselves. Transport presents another challenge. Moving ice over long distances requires speed and insulation. Pack animals can carry containers wrapped in straw or cloth. Night travel reduces heat exposure. Mountain snow may be collected before dawn and delivered to cities, while temperatures remain relatively low. Not all of it survives. Melting is accepted as part of the cost. If half disappears but the remaining half reaches a wealthy customer willing to pay, the journey may still be worthwhile. This creates specialized trades. Someone gathers the snow, someone packs it, someone transports it, someone stores it, someone sells it. Coal becomes part of a supply chain, and supply chains create rules, prices, disputes, and probably the occasional accusation that someone's expensive mountain snow arrives suspiciously wet. Scholars bicker over how widespread access to stored ice really is in many ancient cities. Literary descriptions often focus on rulers and wealthy households, while archaeological evidence can be difficult to connect with ordinary consumers. A surviving ice storage structure demonstrates that cold was preserved. It does not automatically reveal who enjoyed it. Perhaps merchants sold small portions, perhaps institutions controlled access, perhaps only elites benefited. Perhaps ordinary people occasionally purchased chilled treats during festivals or hot weather. The evidence varies. What is clear is that large-scale ice storage requires resources not every household possesses. Someone must own land. Someone must organize labor. Someone must maintain the building. Someone must pay transport costs. This technology therefore reveals social inequality as clearly as culinary ingenuity. A wealthy person eats cooled fruit. A worker carries the ice that cools it. The contrast is difficult to miss. Yet cold storage also appears in communal and practical contexts, especially where winter ice is abundant and local geography makes collection easy. In colder climates, households can take advantage of frozen lakes, snowbanks, shaded pits, and naturally cold structures without royal budgets. A deep northern winter gives ordinary families access to something desert courts must purchase at great expense. Geography redistributes luxury. What is rare in one place can be ordinary in another. You stand near a frozen river where blocks are being cut. The sound is sharp and clean. Metal or stone tools strike the surface. Cracks run outward. A rectangular block shifts free. Several people lift it together. Steam rises faintly from their bodies despite the cold. The work is heavy, but the resource surrounds them. Once stored under insulation, the ice may survive into spring or summer. Fish, meat, milk, and other perishables can benefit from the colder environment, even when freezing is not maintained. A chamber containing melting ice can stay far colder than outside air. This extends the useful life of food. The principle feels surprisingly modern. You're creating a cold room. The machinery is missing. Nature provided the refrigerant months earlier. Your job is simply to stop it disappearing too quickly. No agreement has been reached on whether certain large ancient pits identified by archaeologists serve specifically as ice stores, general cold rooms, water reservoirs, or multiple purposes at different times. Architecture can be deceptive. A deep-lined chamber looks convincing until you remember that humans also store water, grain, wine, and many other things underground. Researchers study drainage systems, wall construction, nearby water features, regional climate, written descriptions, and patterns of use. Sometimes a structure clearly suits ice. Sometimes the interpretation remains cautious. The uncertainty adds a gentle mystery to the cold rooms beneath ancient settlements. You emerge from the chamber into summer again. Warm air touches your face immediately. The contrast is startling. Someone carries a small block of ice past you, wrapped carefully and already shining with meltwater. It will not last forever. That is precisely what makes it valuable. For a brief time. Winter survives in the heat. A drink cools. Fruit chills. A patient receives relief. A wealthy host impresses a guest. A cook delays spoilage. Behind each moment lies a chain of human effort built around something as temporary as frozen water. You watch one clear drop slide from the ice and disappear into the dust. Another follows. The block grows smaller almost invisibly. Yet deep beneath the earth, the larger store remains protected by darkness, thick walls, straw, packed snow, careful drainage, and the ancient determination to keep a little piece of winter alive when summer says it should be gone. You stand in a modern kitchen late at night, and almost everything around you seems effortless. A refrigerator hums softly against the wall. Glass jars wait behind cabinet doors. Bread rests inside a sealed container. Cheese sits wrapped on a shelf. Pickles gleam beneath brine. Dried herbs fill small bottles. A packet of smoked fish waits in the cold, somewhere in the pantry. Raisins have become so ordinary that nobody pauses to admire the astonishing fact that grapes have been transformed into food capable of waiting quietly for months. The kitchen looks modern. The ideas inside it are ancient. Much of food preservation still depends on the same basic principles humans discovered through observation long before anyone understood bacteria, enzymes, oxidation, or refrigeration. Remove water, add salt, increase acidity, reduce exposure to air, keep food cool, encourage helpful microorganisms, protect supplies from pests. Modern technology makes these principles easier to control, but it does not erase them. You open a cupboard and take out dried fruit. The package may have a printed label, a barcode, and nutritional information. but the transformation itself would be recognizable to people who lived thousands of years ago. Water has been removed. Sweetness has concentrated. The fruit has become lighter and more stable. Modern dehydrators use controlled heat and airflow, allowing manufacturers to manage temperature precisely. Ancient drying relied on weather, sunlight, shade, wind, and experience. The equipment changes. The principle remains almost embarrassingly familiar. You find a strip of jerky nearby. It has been sliced thinly, seasoned, dried, and packaged. Again, the ancient logic survives. Reduce moisture and the meat becomes harder for many spoilage organisms to use. Commercial production now relies on careful temperature control and food safety standards, but the ideal would make immediate sense to someone preparing meat beside an old hearth. A supermarket aisle can therefore function like a museum where everything is edible, and most exhibits come with suspiciously cheerful packaging. You move toward the refrigerator. Inside sits a block of cheese. Cheese may feel completely ordinary, but it represents one of humanity's most successful solutions to the problem of fragile milk. Fresh milk changes quickly. Cheese changes deliberately. The liquid becomes curd. Moisture leaves. Salt may be added. Microorganisms develop flavor. Time alters texture. A highly perishable product becomes something capable of surviving much longer. Modern cheesemakers understand the microbes involved and can control temperature, humidity, cultures, and aging conditions with extraordinary precision. Yet the essential transformation remains recognizable. Milk is guided into becoming something else before uncontrolled spoilage can claim it. Records can confirm that cheesemaking has deep roots across pastoral societies, and archaeological evidence shows that humans processed dairy products thousands of years before industrial refrigeration. The exact styles vary enormously. Soft cheeses, hard cheeses, fresh curds, aged rounds, salted varieties, mold-ripened forms. Each represents a different answer to the same old problem. What do you do when the animal produces more milk than you can drink today? The answer turns into cuisine. You open another shelf and find yogurt. Here again, bacteria are not enemies. Selected cultures convert sugars into acids. The milk thickens. Its flavor sharpens. The environment becomes less welcoming to many unwanted organisms. Modern yogurt arrives in tidy cups, sometimes beneath layers of fruit and marketing language promising unusual levels of personal fulfillment. But underneath the branding is fermentation. Invisible organisms perform work ancient households learned to encourage without knowing their names. You reach for a jar of pickles. The lid opens with a small pop. Vinegar and spices rise sharply into the air. Pickling survives because acid remains a remarkably effective preservation tool. Some pickles are preserved directly with vinegar. Others develop acidity through fermentation. Both approaches create conditions that slow many forms of spoilage. Cucumbers are only one possibility. Cabbage, carrots, radishes, onions, beans, turnips, fruit, fish, eggs. Different cultures preserve different foods according to local tastes and resources. What begins as necessity becomes preference. People do not eat pickles merely because fresh vegetables are unavailable. They eat them because they enjoy pickles. That transformation from survival technique to desired flavor is one of the most important legacies of ancient preservation. You smell vinegar and think of kitchens separated by thousands of years. The containers are different. The microbes are better understood. The appetite for sourness remains. Fermentation continues in bread as well. A loaf resting on the counter contains the legacy of people who discovered that dough could rise. Modern bakers may purchase yeast in measured packets. Others maintain sourdough starters containing communities of yeasts and bacteria. A starter must be fed. It changes with temperature. It develops aromas. It can become unusually important to its owner. One curious footnote is that modern sourdough enthusiasts sometimes name their starters as though adopting extremely needy pets. This is perhaps understandable. The starter is alive, requires regular feeding, and becomes unpleasant when neglected. Ancient bakers might recognize the attachment even if they find the names a little dramatic. Fermentation also survives in drinks. Wine, beer, cider, rice wines, fermented teas, cultured beverages. Modern production may involve stainless steel tanks, laboratory-selected yeast strains, refrigeration, filtration, and carefully monitored chemistry. Still, microorganisms consume sugars and create new products. A brewer in a modern facility and a brewer working with ancient grain share more than appearances suggest. Both are managing biological change. The modern brewer simply has cleaner floors and considerably more paperwork. Salt remains equally persistent. You see it in cured meats, cheeses, olives, preserved fish, sauces, and countless packaged foods. Refrigeration reduces the amount required for many purposes, but curing remains culturally important. Prosciutto, salt cod, cured sausages, corned meats, salted cheeses, preserved olives. These foods are not archaeological curiosities. They are dinner. Modern consumers often choose them for flavour rather than necessity. That is one of history's quieter reversals. A technique once used because fresh food could not be trusted to survive becomes something people deliberately seek even while a refrigerator sits 3 meters away. Smoke survives for the same reason. Modern smoking equipment can regulate temperature, fuel, humidity, and airflow with precision impossible around an open household hearth. Yet the appeal remains familiar. Wood smoke alters aroma, colour, surface chemistry, and texture. Fish, cheese, meat, salt, even vegetables can be smoked. The flavour carries emotional weight. Smoke suggests fire, warmth, patience, and outdoor cooking. It can make food feel older than the kitchen preparing it. This does not mean every product labelled smoked has undergone traditional smoking. Modern food production can reproduce smoky flavours in several ways. Still, the cultural association remains powerful. Humans have lived beside fire for such a long time that smoke has become a flavour memory. You turn toward the freezer. Here is the great mechanical change. Cold no longer depends on winter. You do not collect snow from mountains. You do not bury ice beneath straw. You press a button or adjust a dial. Electric refrigeration moves heat away from food continuously, turning cold from a seasonal resource into a household expectation. This transformation changes diets profoundly. Fresh meat can remain usable longer. Milk stays cold. Leftovers wait safely. Frozen vegetables cross seasons. Fish travels between continents under controlled temperatures. Ice appears whenever needed. A form of preservation once associated with geography, climate, wealth, and organised labour becomes ordinary enough that people complain when the ice maker is noisy. That is a remarkable historical achievement disguised as a minor household annoyance. Yet even refrigeration does not stop change completely. Food still dries, fat still oxidize, mold still grow, microorganisms still work slowly. Freezer burn appears, containers leak, someone forgets leftovers at the back until they develop diplomatic immunity. Modern kitchens remain places where humans negotiate with time. The tools are better. The basic challenge remains. Packaging becomes part of that negotiation. Plastic films, metal cans, glass jars, vacuum packs, and sealed cartons reduce exposure to air and contamination. Vacuum sealing removes much of the surrounding air. Modified atmosphere packaging changes the gases around food. Canning uses heat and sealed containers to create long-term stability. These technologies are far more controlled than ancient waxed lids or resin-coated pottery. But the underlying desire is familiar. Create a boundary, protect what is inside, control what enters. A sealed glass jar of preserved fruit belongs to the same broad family of thought as any carefully closed storage vessel. The materials become more sophisticated. The instinct does not. You look at the pantry again. There is flour in a closed container. Rice rests in a dry cupboard. Spices sit away from moisture. Potatoes prefer darkness. Onions need airflow. Olive oil is kept away from strong light. Bread is protected from drying too quickly. Even modern storage instructions echo observations made through generations of household experience. Keep cool, keep dry, keep dark, seal tightly, use soon after opening. These little commands are descendants of very old lessons. Historians still argue whether modern industrial preservation should be understood mainly as a dramatic break from ancient practices, or as an extension of principles humans had already discovered empirically. Both interpretations contain truth. Industrial technology changes scale, safety, consistency, and transportation so completely that the modern food system would be unimaginable to an ancient household. Yet dehydration remains dehydration. Fermentation remains fermentation. Salt still draws water. Cold still slows change. Air still matters. The continuity is difficult to ignore. Modern science explains what older experience could only observe. That explanation allows greater control. A food scientist can measure acidity. A refrigerator holds a chosen temperature. A commercial dryer regulates airflow. A fermentation facility monitors microbial cultures. A packaging plant can remove oxygen. Preservation becomes measurable. But knowledge gained through measurement does not make inherited food traditions obsolete. Often it helps protect them. Traditional cheeses can be produced more safely. Fermented foods can be monitored. Drying can be standardized. Historic methods can survive without relying entirely on chance. You run your fingers across a row of jars, jam, pickles, dried beans, honey, rice. Each one contains time in a slightly different form. Some foods survive because moisture has been removed, some because sugar concentration is high, some because acidity protects them, some because the container forms a barrier, some because they naturally store well when dry. The kitchen is a collection of strategies. You rarely think about them because preservation has become routine. That may be the greatest sign of success. A technology becomes invisible when it works so reliably that nobody notices it anymore. You eat bread without thinking about yeast. You sprinkle salt without thinking about storage. You open yogurt without thinking about bacteria. You pour olive oil without thinking about oxidation. You retrieve frozen vegetables without thinking about winter ice. Thousands of years of experimentation disappear into ordinary gestures, and perhaps that is where ancient preservation survives most clearly, not in museums, not in ruined storerooms, not in scholarly arguments. It survives in flavour, the sour bite of a pickle, the sweetness of dried fruit, the dense chew of cured meat, the aroma of smoke, the sharpness of aged cheese, the comfort of bread. These tastes carry techniques across generations, even when the original necessity has vanished. You stand quietly in the kitchen as the refrigerator continues its gentle hum. Beyond the window, night has settled. A jar clicks softly as its lid tightens beneath your hand. Food waits behind glass. Nothing about the moment feels historic. Yet the instinct is ancient. Keep what you have, protect it carefully, make abundance last, give tomorrow something to eat. And now the kitchen grows quieter. The bright surfaces soften in the darkness, and all those jars, loaves, cheeses, fruits, grains, and small preserved things seem to settle into stillness around you. There is nothing more to prepare tonight. No basket needs carrying. No fire needs tending. No vessel needs checking. You can leave the work where it belongs. Let the hum in the room become distant and steady. Let the shelves fade from your attention. The old hands that dried, stirred, salted, sealed, buried, carried, and stored their food have long since become part of history. But their patient habits remain in ordinary kitchens everywhere. Your breathing slows, the room becomes cooler, the last scent of bread and herbs drifts away. There is a snuff for tonight, enough for morning, enough waiting quietly in the dark. And with that small assurance, the ancient world grows softer, the kitchen disappears, and the night closes gently around you.